The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy that flows through star systems like invisible currents through an endless ocean. The Jedi spoke of balance, of light and dark in eternal struggle. The Sith knew it as a tool for domination, a wellspring of unlimited power. But neither order, neither philosophy, had ever encountered something from beyond the galaxy itself, a power that existed independent of midichlorians, separate from the cosmic force, yet equally divine. On this day, the galaxy would learn that the Force, vast and incomprehensible as it seemed, was not alone in the universe. The sky above Rannon 4 shattered. It began as a distortion in hyperspace, detected by Imperial sensor arrays across 3 sectors. Navigation officers aboard star destroyers watched in confusion as their instruments recorded an energy signature unlike anything in their databases, not ion engines, not hyperdrive radiation, not even the exotic particles generated by experimental separatist superweapons during the Clone Wars. This was something else entirely. A cascade of rainbow light tore through real space like a wound in reality itself, spiraling and contracting, pulling itself inward with impossible geometry. Then it collapsed, and something fell from the stars. The object, if it could be called that, screamed through Rannon IV's atmosphere, trailing thunder and lightning. Clouds evaporated in its wake. The sonic boom shattered windows in the Imperial garrison 40 kilometers from the impact site. Stormtroopers manning defensive positions grabbed their helmets as the ground trembled beneath their boots. Officers shouted conflicting orders. Alarm klaxons wailed across the mining facility that had turned this once green world into a landscape of open pits and toxic refineries. In the wastes, the desert expanse beyond the mine operations where nothing lived except dust storms and the memories of what Rannon 4 had been before the Empire arrived, a crater bloomed like a wound in the earth. Thor Odinson, god of thunder, son of Odin, Avenger of Midgard, opened his eyes to an alien sky. Pain was an old companion, familiar as Mjolnir's weight in his hand. He had endured Thanos' brutality, the power of a star channeled through his veins, the agony of loss when half the universe turned to ash. This pain was different, not injury, but wrongness. Every cell in his body screamed that he existed somewhere he should not be, that the fundamental laws governing reality had shifted around him like a cloak woven from foreign cloth. He pushed himself to his knees, Stormbreaker clutched in his right fist. The mighty axe hummed with residual energy, its blade still crackling with the rainbow light of the Bifrost. Or what had been the Bifrost before something went catastrophically wrong. The memory returned in fragments. Heimdall's Observatory. A mission to investigate an anomaly detected at the edge of Asgard's realm. The Bifrost engaging, its familiar tunnel of light and color carrying him between worlds as it had 1,000 times before. Then the tunnel fracturing. Reality itself splintering like glass around him. The sensation of falling not through space but through the walls between universes, tumbling through cosmic architecture never meant to be traversed. And then impact. Thor rose to his full height, golden hair matted with dust and sweat, his armor scorched but intact. He turned slowly, taking in his surroundings. Desert in every direction, rust-red sand beneath twin suns that hung in the sky like watching eyes. The air tasted wrong, too thin, too dry, with an acrid chemical undertone that spoke of industrial pollution. In the distance, black smoke rose from what appeared to be a massive complex of buildings and machinery. Heimdall, Thor called, his voice carrying across the wasteland. Heimdall, I require the Bifrost. Silence answered him. Not even the whisper of wind across sand. He tried again, channeling power into his words, letting his voice boom with the authority of Asgard's throne. Heimdall. I command you to open the bridge. Nothing. The connection that had always existed between Thor and Asgard's all-seeing guardian, that invisible thread that allowed the Bifrost to lock onto him across galaxies, had gone silent. Either Heimdall could not hear him, or Thor stood somewhere so distant that not even the gatekeeper's all-seeing eyes could pierce the void between. For the first time in centuries, Thor felt truly alone. He gripped Stormbreaker tighter, letting the weapon's power flow through him. Lightning arced across his shoulders, blue-white tendrils of electricity dancing along his arms. The axe responded to his will, its enchantment still intact despite whatever dimensional barrier he'd crossed. That was something. Without Stormbreaker, he would be merely superhuman. With it, he was a god. A sound reached his ears, mechanical, rhythmic, growing louder. Thor turned toward the noise and saw them cresting a dune perhaps half a kilometer away, vehicles, 3 of them, sleek and angular, hovering above the sand on repulsor technology. They moved with military precision, forming a search pattern that would bring them directly to his crater within minutes. Thor waited, making no attempt to hide. He stood in the center of the impact site, Stormbreaker planted in the ground before him, every inch the warrior prince of Asgard. If these people meant him harm, they would learn quickly the folly of threatening a son of Odin. If they came in peace, perhaps they could explain where, and when, he had landed. The vehicles slowed as they approached, their pilots clearly having spotted him. They circled the crater cautiously before settling to the sand, engines whining down to idle. Doors hissed open with pneumatic pressure, and figures emerged. They wore armor, white armor that covered them head to toe, segmented plates over black bodysuits, helmets that completely concealed their faces. Each one carried a rifle of unfamiliar design, weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. 12 of them formed a perimeter around the crater, their movements precise and professional. Soldiers, Thor recognized immediately. He had fought alongside enough warriors in his long life to recognize military discipline when he saw it. One of them, marked with an orange shoulder pauldron that presumably denoted rank, took 3 steps forward and raised his weapon. When he spoke, his voice emerged from the helmet's vocabulator distorted and mechanical. Unidentified individual, you are in violation of Imperial territory. Surrender immediately and prepare for detainment and interrogation. Imperial. The word carried weight, spoke of governance and authority. Thor's jaw tightened. He had little patience for empires, having seen too many collapse under the weight of their own hubris. I am Thor of Asgard, he declared, his voice rolling across the desert like distant thunder. I mean no harm to your people, but I will not be detained. Lower your weapons and take me to whoever commands this world. I would speak with them regarding my return home. The soldiers' weapons did not lower. Instead, the leader took another step forward, his rifle now aimed directly at Thor's chest. Final warning. Surrender or we will open fire. Thor sighed, the sound heavy with centuries of disappointed experience. Why did it always come to this? Why did every encounter with authority begin with threats and violence? Very well, he said quietly, almost sadly. But know that I gave you the chance for peace. The leader's finger moved toward his trigger, and lightning answered Thor's unspoken call, cascading from the cloudless sky in a pillar of brilliant destruction. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The battle for Rannon 4 had begun. The lightning struck with the force of divine judgment, a column of pure energy that would have vaporized an ordinary mortal where he stood. But Thor was no ordinary being, and his lightning obeyed him as naturally as a limb responds to thought. The bolt split mid-descent, fragmenting into a dozen tendrils that lashed outward in a perfect circle, striking the sand around the perimeter of soldiers with calculated precision. The ground erupted. Sand superheated instantly, fusing into glass that shattered into fragments. The shockwave hurled the white-armored soldiers backward like toys scattered by an angry child. Their weapons flew from their hands, spinning through the air. Some landed on their backs, armor cracked and smoking. Others tumbled across the dunes, groaning as they struggled to rise. Thor had been careful. He could have killed them all with less effort than it took to breathe, could have called down enough voltage to reduce them and their vehicles to carbon shadows on melted sand. But these were soldiers following orders, not monsters who deserved annihilation. He would not become the villain in someone else's story simply because he could. The leader, the one with the orange pauldron, pushed himself up on shaking arms, his helmet's vocabulator crackling with static. All units, regroup, target is hostile, repeat, target is. Enough, Thor said, his voice cutting through the calm chatter like a blade. He strode forward, stepping out of his crater with Stormbreaker held casually at his side, lightning still dancing along his free hand. I do not wish to harm you, but I will defend myself if you continue this foolishness. Tell me where I am. What world is this? What empire claims dominion here? The leader's hand moved toward the blaster pistol on his hip, a last desperate attempt at maintaining authority. Thor gestured, and a smaller bolt of lightning struck the weapon, fusing its components into useless slag before the trooper could draw it. I said enough. The other soldiers had managed to get to their feet, forming a ragged defensive line despite their obvious fear. Thor could see it in their body language, the way they held their rifles with trembling hands, the slight backward lean of their postures. They had been trained to face many threats, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for a being who commanded the sky itself. One of the vehicle's comm systems squawked to life, an authoritative voice barking through the speakers. Ground Team 7, report. We detected massive energy discharge at your coordinates. What is your status? The leader looked from Thor to his scattered squad, then back to Thor. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the trooper reached up and activated his helmet comm. Command, this is Ground Team 7. We have encountered, unknown hostile. Individual displays capabilities consistent with, he paused, searching for words to describe what he had witnessed. Consistent with high-level force abilities. Possibly a surviving Jedi or unknown force sensitive. Requesting immediate backup and Inquisitor support. Thor's eyes narrowed. Jedi. Force sensitive. Inquisitor. These terms meant nothing to him, but the context was clear enough. They thought his power came from whatever force governed this place's mysteries, and they were calling in specialists to deal with it. I am no Jedi, Thor said firmly. My power comes from Asgard, from lineage and birthright, not from whatever energies flow through your galaxy. But I will gladly speak with these Inquisitors if they can answer my questions. Where is the nearest settlement? The nearest seat of power? The comm system crackled again before the soldier could respond. Ground Team 7, reinforcements are en route. Maintain contact with the hostile but do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. Inquisitor Varn will arrive within the hour. An hour. Thor could work with that. He turned his gaze toward the distant industrial complex, its towers and smokestacks reaching toward the alien sky like the fingers of a drowning giant grasping for air. That would be where the real authority resided, where he might find someone capable of explaining this galaxy's laws and, more importantly, someone with the knowledge or technology to help him return home. Your weapons, Thor said, gesturing to the scattered rifles. Retrieve them if you wish. I will not strike first again. But know that if you raise them against me, I will defend myself with all the power at my command. The soldiers exchanged glances, their helmets hiding whatever silent communication passed between them. Finally, hesitantly, they began collecting their weapons. True to his word, Thor made no move to stop them, simply standing in place like a statue cast in bronze and divine authority. The leader approached cautiously, keeping his rifle pointed at the ground in a gesture that might have been respect or might simply have been pragmatism. You said your power comes from Asgard? I've never heard of any system by that name. Where are you from? Not from this galaxy, Thor answered honestly. There was an accident during my travel. The Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that connects the 9 realms, malfunctioned. I was cast through the void between universes, and now I stand here, wherever here might be. Behind the helmet's emotionless facade, Thor could sense the soldiers' confusion. These people knew nothing of the 9 realms, nothing of Asgard or the world tree or the cosmic architecture that held reality together. To them, he must seem like a madman or a liar, spinning impossible tales while standing in a crater carved by his own violent arrival. Interdimensional travel is theoretically possible, the soldier said slowly, as if working through a problem. But no known civilization has achieved it. The Empire's scientists have explored the concept, but the energy requirements alone would require harnessing a star. I commanded the Bifrost, Thor said with a slight smile. A weapon forged in the heart of a dying star powered it. Energy was never the problem. Control was. More vehicles appeared on the horizon, larger ones, heavily armored transports that kicked up massive plumes of sand as they raced toward the crater. Thor counted 10 of them, each likely carrying additional soldiers. His arrival had clearly triggered a military response significant enough to warrant serious resources. The leader noticed them too and seemed to relax slightly, as if numbers would somehow shift the balance of power back toward his favor. Thor almost pitied him. He had faced down the armies of Jotunheim, stood against the Dark Elves' reality-warping weapons, fought beside Avengers against threats that would have shattered lesser worlds. A few dozen soldiers with energy weapons, impressive as their technology might be, posed no real threat. But he would give them this moment of confidence. Let them feel secure in their numbers. It would make the eventual conversation easier if they believed they had some leverage. The transports formed a wide circle around the crater, disgorging soldiers in organized formations. These wore slightly different armor, black accents instead of white, heavier plating, weapons that hummed with greater power output. Elite troops, Thor guessed. The Empire's best. An officer emerged from the command transport, his armor marked with distinctive red and black insignia that spoke of high rank. He surveyed the scene with sharp eyes visible through his helmet's visor, taking in the fused glass, the scattered initial squad, and Thor standing calmly at the center of it all. Secure the perimeter, the officer commanded, his voice carrying natural authority. Energy shields at maximum. If the target moves, I want suppressing fire immediately. Portable shield generators hummed to life, creating shimmering barriers of blue energy between Thor and the soldiers. Snipers took position on the transport's roofs, their long-barreled rifles tracking his every movement. Heavy weapons teams set up crew-served cannons that would have looked more at home on armored vehicles than in infantry hands. All of this preparation, all of this fear and caution, for one man. Thor felt the familiar weight of it, the burden of being perceived as a monster simply because his power exceeded mortal comprehension. How many times had he stood exactly like this, surrounded by those who saw him as a threat first and a person second? On Midgard it had been S.H.I.E.L.D., their agents and protocols and contingency plans. On other worlds it had been warlords and tyrants who could not tolerate anyone mightier than themselves. I am called Thor, he announced, his voice carrying easily across the assembled forces. I am not your enemy unless you make me one. I seek only information and assistance in returning to my home realm. If your empire can provide this, I will depart peacefully and trouble you no more. The officer stepped forward, stopping just behind the shield barrier. I am Commander Tarn of the 204th Imperial Garrison. You have trespassed on restricted Imperial territory, assaulted Imperial forces, and displayed capabilities that mark you as an extreme threat to galactic security. By order of the Empire, you will surrender yourself for examination and processing. Resistance will be met with overwhelming force. Thor's expression hardened. I have already explained that I will not be detained. Take me to your leader, this emperor you serve, and I will discuss terms. But I am a prince of Asgard, and I bow to no one without cause. The emperor is not someone you simply meet, Commander Tarn said, and there was something almost like dark amusement in his tone. But you are correct that this situation exceeds my authority to handle. The Inquisitor will decide your fate. This Inquisitor, Thor said carefully. What is their role? What authority do they wield? The Inquisitorius serves the Emperor directly, hunting down enemies of the Empire and rooting out threats to galactic peace. They wield the power of the dark side of the Force, and they do not show mercy to those who defy Imperial law. Dark side. Force. More terminology Thor didn't understand, but the implications were clear. These Inquisitors were enforcers, hunters, executioners cloaked in ideology and mystical power. He had dealt with their kind before on other worlds, the hammer that saw every problem as a nail, the sword that answered every question with blood. Very well. If they wanted to send their champion, Thor would face them as he had faced every challenger who had ever stood before him. With honor, with strength, and with the certainty that the son of Odin had never, not once in his long life, bent his knee to tyranny. Then I will wait for this Inquisitor, Thor declared. And we shall see if their power matches their reputation. Above them, the twin suns continued their slow arc across the alien sky, and in the distance, something vast and dark began its descent through the atmosphere, a ship unlike the transports, its hull black as the void between stars, its very presence seeming to drain light from the surrounding air. The Inquisitor had arrived. The ship descended with predatory grace, its triangular silhouette cutting through Rannon IV's atmosphere like a dagger through silk. Unlike the utilitarian transports that had brought the garrison troops, this vessel radiated menace from every angle, sharp edges, dark hull plating that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and engine signatures that hummed with a frequency that made Thor's teeth ache. He had seen enough warships in his lifetime to recognize one built not for transport or cargo, but for intimidation. The soldiers around the perimeter shifted uncomfortably as the ship approached, their weapons lowering slightly as if even they feared what emerged from that dark vessel more than they feared the god standing before them. Commander Tarn straightened his posture, his hand moving unconsciously to his sidearm before stopping himself, a nervous gesture that spoke volumes about the hierarchy of fear within this empire. The ship touched down 50 meters from the crater's edge, repulsor engines kicking up a sandstorm that forced the troopers to activate their helmet filters. Thor simply stood his ground, letting the wind whip his hair and cape, Stormbreaker planted firmly before him. He had weathered far worse storms, some of his own making. The boarding ramp extended with a hiss of hydraulics, and a figure emerged from the shadows within. She was humanoid, tall and lean, with gray skin marked by deep crimson tattoos that traced geometric patterns across her face and down her neck. Her eyes burned with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the bright desert air, yellow irises surrounded by darkness, the mark of something corrupt dwelling within. She wore black armor adorned with the same Imperial insignia Thor had seen on the soldiers, but hers was personalized, modified, with a cylindrical weapon hanging from her belt that gleamed with dark promise. But what struck Thor most was the sensation that rolled off her in waves, a pressure against his senses, like invisible hands pushing at the edges of his consciousness. It was similar to the sensation he'd felt when Wanda Maximoff had played with his mind, or when Loki's sorcery pressed against his mental defenses. This woman wielded power, true power, though it felt fundamentally different from Asgardian magic or the Infinity Stone's cosmic might. This was the force they spoke of. And he could feel it now, truly feel it for the first time since arriving, a vast web of energy connecting everything in this galaxy, flowing through the air like currents in an invisible ocean. The woman before him had bent those currents to her will, twisted them into something sharp and cruel. "I am Inquisitor Varn," the woman announced, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. She descended the ramp with measured steps, each one deliberate, theatrical. Third sister of the Inquisitorius, hand of the Emperor, seeker of the shrouded truth. She stopped at the edge of the crater, regarding Thor with the casual interest one might show a curious insect. "And you are the disturbance that has disrupted an entire sector's hyperspace lanes and destroyed millions of credits worth of Imperial equipment with your dramatic entrance." Thor inclined his head slightly, acknowledgement, not deference. "I am Thor Odinson of Asgard. The destruction was not intentional. As I have told your soldiers, there was an accident during my travel between realms. I require information about this galaxy and assistance in returning to my home. Provide this, and I will trouble your empire no further." Varn smiled, and there was nothing warm in the expression. "You speak as if you have any leverage in this situation, as if you are anything more than a prisoner who simply hasn't been properly secured yet." She began walking around the crater's circumference, circling him like a predator evaluating prey. "Tell me, Thor Odinson of Asgard, where did you learn to manipulate the Force?" Your technique is crude, unrefined, but the raw power you displayed, she gestured to the fused glass scattered across the sand. That suggests training or natural talent far exceeding normal parameters. I do not manipulate your force, Thor replied, turning to keep her in his sight. My power comes from Asgard, from my heritage as son of Odin. I am the god of thunder. Lightning answers my call because it is mine to command, not because I draw upon ambient energies. God. Varn laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. There are no gods, Thor Odinson. There is only the Force, light and dark, life and death, power and weakness. What you call divine heritage is simply a strong connection to the Force expressing itself through biological advantage. You are Force-sensitive, whether you acknowledge it or not, and that makes you subject to Imperial law regarding unsanctioned Force users. Thor's grip on Stormbreaker tightened. I have met many who fancied themselves gods and found them wanting. But I have also learned that divinity takes many forms across the cosmos. What I am is no concern of your empire's laws. I am not of this galaxy. Your jurisdiction ends where my sovereignty begins. Bold words. Varn stopped her circling, facing him directly across the crater. Her hand drifted to the cylindrical weapon at her belt. But words mean nothing against the reality of power. The Empire rules this galaxy because we possess the strength to enforce our will. Individuals like you, powerful, dangerous, uncontrolled, represent chaos. Chaos must be eliminated or bent to the Emperor's service. She drew the weapon, and with a sharp snap hiss, a blade of pure red energy extended from its hilt, a meter of contained plasma that hummed with barely restrained violence. Thor had never seen such a weapon, but he understood it immediately. An energy blade, similar in concept to the photon weapon some advanced civilizations wielded, but with a sophistication that spoke to centuries of refinement. This is a lightsaber, Varn explained, holding the weapon in a ready stance that demonstrated years of training. It can cut through nearly any material in the galaxy, durasteel, permacrete, bone, flesh. The blade is plasma contained by a magnetic field, powered by a kyber crystal attuned to the Force itself. She smiled again, that predatory expression. I'm curious to see if it can cut through whatever Asgardian flesh is made of. Thor raised Stormbreaker, letting lightning arc across its blade in response. And I am curious to see if your weapon can withstand the bite of URU metal forged in the heart of a dying star. But I would prefer to avoid this test, Inquisitor. Violence serves neither of us. Violence serves the Empire, Varn countered. It maintains order, enforces obedience, culls the weak. You display power without permission, exist without authorization. That cannot stand. She moved then, faster than any human Thor had encountered, Force-enhanced speed carrying her across the crater in a blur of black armor and crimson energy. The lightsaber came down in a diagonal slash aimed at Thor's shoulder, a strike meant to disable rather than kill. She wanted him captured, not corpse. Stormbreaker rose to meet the blow. The two weapons collided with a sound like reality tearing, a thunderous crash of conflicting energies that sent visible shockwaves rippling across the desert. Lightning exploded from the point of impact, cascading down the lightsaber's blade and up Varn's arms. She screamed and disengaged, leaping backward with Force-augmented agility, her weapon flickering but holding stable. Thor stood his ground, completely unharmed, electricity still dancing across his shoulders. Your blade is impressive, he acknowledged. But Stormbreaker was made to kill Thanos, the mad titan who wielded the power of all 6 Infinity Stones. It will not break against your weapon, no matter how refined. Varn flexed her hands, wisps of smoke rising from her gauntlets where the lightning had earthed through her armor. Pain and anger warred in her yellow eyes, but underneath both was something new, uncertainty. She had expected her lightsaber to cleave through whatever primitive weapon this barbarian carried. Instead, she had been repelled, shocked, forced back by power that shouldn't exist. Impossible, she hissed. No material can resist a lightsaber indefinitely. You're using the Force to reinforce your weapon, channeling energy through it. Believe what you wish, Thor said. It changes nothing. I have no quarrel with you, Inquisitor, but I will not submit to detention or interrogation. Take me to someone with real authority, your Emperor, your Senate, whoever makes decisions beyond simple enforcement, and I will negotiate in good faith. Continue to threaten me, and you will learn why Asgardian warriors are feared across the 9 realms. Behind Varn, Commander Tarn had ordered his troops into combat formation, their weapons trained on Thor despite the obvious futility. The Inquisitor raised a hand, stopping them from firing. She was calculating now, Thor could see it, weighing her chances of victory against the very real possibility of defeat. The Emperor does not meet with every would-be insurgent or force-sensitive refugee who wanders into Imperial space, Varn said, her voice carefully controlled. But you are correct that this situation exceeds my mandate to resolve through simple elimination. She deactivated her lightsaber, though her hand remained near the weapon. I will contact my superiors. Lord Vader will decide your fate. Lord Vader. Thor repeated the name, tasting its weight. Something about the title carried menace, as if the galaxy itself flinched when it was spoken. The Emperor's right hand, Varn explained, and for the first time Thor heard something like fear in her voice. The greatest of the Inquisitorius, master of the dark side, the Empire's ultimate enforcer. If anyone beyond the Emperor himself has authority to judge you, it is him. She turned and walked back toward her ship, gesturing for the soldiers to maintain their perimeter but not engage. At the boarding ramp she paused, looking back at Thor with an expression that might have been respect or might simply have been the acknowledgement one warrior gives another. A word of advice, Thor Odinson. When you meet Lord Vader, do not expect mercy. Do not expect understanding. He is what you would become if you embraced the dark side completely, power without restraint, strength without compassion. Many have stood before him claiming to be gods or demons or creatures beyond Imperial law. Her yellow eyes seemed to glow brighter. None of them survived the encounter. The ship's ramp retracted, engines humming to life. Within moments the vessel lifted off, banking toward orbit and leaving Thor alone with 100 Imperial soldiers and a growing certainty that his time in this galaxy would be far more complicated than a simple navigation error. Commander Tarn stepped forward, his earlier bravado replaced with professional wariness. You will wait here for Lord Vader's arrival. Estimated time, 18 hours. Rations and water will be provided. Any attempt to leave or attack Imperial forces will be met with orbital bombardment from the Star Destroyers in high orbit. Thor glanced upward, his enhanced vision picking out the distant shapes hanging in the black, massive wedge-shaped vessels that dwarfed anything in Asgard's fleet. Orbital bombardment. They would destroy their own garrison, their own people, to eliminate him if necessary. The Empire ruled through overwhelming force, crushing anything that threatened its absolute control. He had seen this pattern before, on other worlds, in other times. Tyranny dressed in the language of order. Oppression justified by security. And always, always, those with power using it to dominate those without. I will wait, Thor said quietly. For now. But know this, Commander, I have stood against tyrants before. If your empire proves itself worthy of respect, I will offer it. If it proves itself corrupt, lightning flickered across Stormbreaker's blade. Then Lord Vader will learn what happens when the God of Thunder decides a throne needs toppling. The twin suns continued their arc, shadows lengthening across the rust-red desert, and Thor settled in to wait for the arrival of the monster in dark armor that this galaxy feared above all others. Somewhere in the distant stars, Darth Vader received Inquisitor Varn's report and began preparations for his journey to Rannon 4. The galaxy was about to witness a confrontation between power ancient and power absolute. The hours crawled by like wounded beasts across the desert. Thor sat cross-legged in the center of his crater, Stormbreaker resting across his knees, while the twin suns traced their path toward the horizon. The Imperial soldiers maintained their perimeter with mechanical discipline, rotating shifts, checking equipment, never lowering their guard despite the futility of their position. He could have left at any time, called lightning from the sky to blind them, used Stormbreaker to carve through their shields and vehicles, disappeared into the desert wastes before they could coordinate a response. But he stayed. Not out of fear, but out of curiosity. This galaxy fascinated him in ways few places ever had. The force that permeated everything, invisible yet omnipresent, reminded him of the Yggdrasil's roots connecting the 9 realms, a fundamental architecture underlying reality itself. The Empire's technology impressed him with its sophistication, their weapons and ships demonstrating engineering principles that rivaled even Asgard's best artisans. And the people themselves, these humans encased in white armor following orders with unwavering loyalty, represented something both admirable and troubling. They feared their own leaders more than they feared him. That spoke volumes about the nature of this empire. As the first sun dipped below the horizon and the second began its descent, Commander Tarn approached the crater's edge. He carried a sealed container which he set down carefully before backing away to a respectful distance. Rations, the commander explained. Field standard. The water is purified. Eating and drinking are permitted. Thor opened the container, examining the contents with mild interest. Compressed protein bars, hydration packs, what appeared to be some form of preserved fruit. Basic sustenance for soldiers in the field. He hadn't eaten since before the Bifrost malfunction, hours, possibly days ago, depending on how time functioned across dimensional boundaries, but Asgardian physiology allowed him to go far longer without nourishment if necessary. Still, the gesture carried meaning. They were treating him as a person, not merely a target to be eliminated. My thanks, Thor said, selecting one of the water packs and drinking deeply. The liquid tasted flat, overprocessed, but it was wet and cool. Tell me, Commander, how long have you served this empire? Tarn hesitated, clearly uncertain whether engaging in conversation violated some protocol. Finally, he answered. 15 years. I enlisted shortly after the Clone Wars ended and the Empire brought order to the chaos. Clone Wars. Thor latched onto the phrase. There was a great conflict, then. A civil war. The Separatist crisis, Tarn confirmed, relaxing slightly as the conversation remained neutral. The Republic fractured. Entire sectors seceded, backed by the Trade Federation and other corporate interests. The Jedi led our armies, commanding clone troopers bred specifically for combat. The war lasted 3 years and devastated thousands of worlds. And the Jedi? Thor pressed. Inquisitor Varn mentioned unsanctioned force users. What happened to these warrior priests? Tarn's posture stiffened, and even through the helmet's emotionless facade, Thor sensed discomfort. The Jedi betrayed the Republic. They attempted to assassinate Chancellor Palpatine, the man who became our Emperor, in a bid for power. They were eliminated, branded traitors. Only the Inquisitorius remains to hunt down the survivors and prevent their corruption from spreading. Thor's expression remained neutral, but his mind worked rapidly, piecing together implications. A warrior order eliminated for alleged treason. An emperor who rose from crisis to absolute power. A purge justified by security concerns. He had witnessed this pattern on other worlds, seen how easily fear could be weaponized, how quickly liberators became oppressors. You believe this? Thor asked quietly. That an entire order of peacekeepers simply decided one day to betray everything they stood for? I believe in the evidence, Tarn replied, his voice hardening. I saw the holorecordings of Jedi slaughtering clone troopers, cutting down their own men in the field. I watched Grand Master Yoda himself attack the Emperor in the Senate chamber. Whatever the Jedi claimed to be, their actions revealed their true nature, power-hungry manipulators who couldn't accept losing their political influence. Thor said nothing for a long moment, simply studying the commander's stance, the conviction in his voice. Either the man genuinely believed what he said, or the lie had been so thoroughly constructed that even questioning it felt like heresy. Both possibilities disturbed him equally. On Asgard, Thor finally said, we have a saying. The victors write the history, but the survivors remember the truth. I do not claim to know what truly happened in your Clone Wars, Commander. I was not there. But in my experience, when an entire civilization is painted as uniformly evil, it is wise to question who wields the brush. Before Tarn could respond, his helmet's comm system chirped urgently. He listened for a moment, his body language shifting from conversational to combat alert in an instant. When he spoke, his voice carried carefully controlled tension. All units, priority alert. Lord Vader's shuttle has entered the atmosphere. ETA, 6 minutes. Maintain perimeter. No one approaches the crater without direct authorization. The effect on the garrison was immediate and profound. Soldiers who had stood watch with professional discipline now moved with barely concealed anxiety. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Shield generators were tested repeatedly. Some of the troopers exchanged glances, or at least turned their helmets toward each other in what Thor interpreted as nervous communication. They feared this Vader more than they feared the god sitting in front of them. The second sun had nearly set when Thor felt it, a pressure on reality itself, similar to what he'd sensed from Inquisitor Varn but magnified 100-fold. If Varn's presence had been like invisible hands pushing at his consciousness, this was like standing before an ocean of dark power, vast and deep and utterly merciless. The force itself seemed to contract around a single point in the sky, bending toward an approaching will of such intensity that Thor instinctively gripped Stormbreaker tighter. The shuttle appeared as a dark shape against the purple twilight, descending on columns of blue repulsor energy. It was smaller than Varn's ship, more utilitarian, but somehow more menacing, a vessel designed for function rather than intimidation, which made it all the more threatening. This was not a ship meant to frighten enemies. This was transportation for someone who needed no external threats to establish dominance. The shuttle touched down at the crater's edge, landing struts extending with hydraulic precision. For a long moment, nothing happened. The boarding ramp remained closed. No one emerged. But the pressure continued to build, like atmospheric changes before a storm, until Thor felt his skin prickling with electricity that had nothing to do with his own power. Then the ramp descended, and Darth Vader emerged into the fading light. He was tall, not quite as tall as Thor, but close, and broad across the shoulders in a way that suggested massive physical strength beneath his armor. Black armor, every surface of it, darker than the void between stars, with a chest piece that gleamed with technological complexity and a helmet that was a mask of absolute authority. No features were visible, no humanity showed through. Just black metal, angular and predatory, with a triangular viewport that suggested eyes watching from behind a barrier that could never be breached. But what truly marked him was the sound. With each step Vader took, a mechanical breathing apparatus cycled, a deep, rhythmic inhale followed by a hiss of pressurized exhale. The sound echoed across the desert like the heartbeat of some vast machine, regular and inexorable as death itself. It was the sound of a man who should have died but refused to do so, who clung to life through sheer force of will and technological intervention. Thor rose to his feet, Stormbreaker held ready but not threatening. He had faced many warriors in his long life, frost giants and dark elves, Chitauri legions and Thanos' armies. He knew how to read an opponent, how to assess threat levels and combat capabilities from stance and movement alone. Vader moved like a killer. Every step was balanced, weight distributed perfectly, ready to explode into violence at any moment. His right hand hung near a lightsaber hilt at his belt, not touching it, not drawing it, but positioned for the fastest possible deployment. His head turned slightly, taking in the scene, the crater, the fused glass, the deployment of troops, and finally, Thor himself. When Vader spoke, his voice emerged from the helmet's vocabulator as a deep mechanical rumble, devoid of warmth or mercy, each word carrying the weight of absolute authority. You are the disturbance. The anomaly that has disrupted hyperspace across 3 sectors and displayed power without sanction. It was not a question. I am Darth Vader, Supreme Commander of the Imperial Military, Dark Lord of the Sith, and the Emperor's Enforcer. Explain your presence in this galaxy before I decide that explanation is unnecessary. Thor met that mechanical gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated by the theatrics of armor and breathing apparatus. He had stared down Hela, the goddess of death herself. He had faced Thanos on the fields of Wakanda. This Dark Lord, powerful as he clearly was, would not make him flinch. "I am Thor, son of Odin, god of thunder, prince of Asgard," he replied with equal formality. "I come not from this galaxy but from beyond it, cast here by accident during travel between realms. I have no interest in your empire's politics or territories. I seek only information that might help me return home and the means to do so." "Home," Vader repeated, and there might have been something almost like mockery in that mechanical voice. "You speak of realms and gods as if such concepts have meaning beyond primitive superstition. You are force-sensitive, whether you acknowledge it or not. Your power marks you as a threat to Imperial order. There are only 3 options available to you: service to the Empire, imprisonment in a research facility where your abilities can be studied and contained, or death." Lightning crackled across Thor's shoulders, an involuntary response to the casual dismissal of his autonomy. "I am a prince of Asgard. I bow to no one who has not earned that respect through honor and deed. Your empire has shown me only soldiers following orders and enforcers threatening violence against someone who has done you no intentional harm. Give me reason to respect your authority, or do not be surprised when I reject it." For a long moment, Vader simply stood there, his breathing apparatus cycling with mechanical regularity. Then his hand moved, not toward his lightsaber, but rising with palm open, fingers spreading in a gesture Thor didn't recognize. The force slammed into Thor like a physical blow, invisible pressure wrapping around his throat and lifting him off his feet. It was telekinesis, similar to what Wanda Maximoff could do, but focused with surgical precision and backed by power that dwarfed anything Thor had felt from the young Avenger. Vader was not simply grabbing him with mental energy, he was seizing Thor's entire respiratory system, cutting off air, crushing his windpipe with the casual effort one might use to squeeze an insect. Lesser beings would have died in seconds. Ordinary humans would have had their necks snapped instantly. Even most enhanced individuals would have blacked out from oxygen deprivation. Thor was the god of thunder. His physiology, forged in Asgard's unique environment and refined over 1,500 years of life, did not require air the way mortal creatures did. He could survive in the vacuum of space, endure atmospheric extremes that would kill anything born on lesser worlds. The force choke caused discomfort, pressure, but not true harm. He looked directly at Vader, lightning dancing in his eyes, and smiled. "Is this meant to impress me?" Then he called the lightning. It came not from the sky but from within him, blue-white energy exploding outward in all directions with Thor as the epicenter. The force grip shattered like glass, the invisible bonds disrupted by electromagnetic interference on a scale that defied conventional physics. Vader staggered backward, his hand dropping, and for just a moment Thor saw the Dark Lord truly surprised. Thor landed on his feet, Stormbreaker crackling with contained power. "I told you. My strength is my own. Your force does not govern me, cannot control me, because I am not of this galaxy. Now, would you prefer to continue testing each other's power until one of us lies dead in this crater? Or shall we attempt civilized conversation?" Vader's hand moved to his lightsaber, and the weapon ignited with a snap hiss that seemed louder than it should have been, a blade of crimson plasma, deeper red than Varn's, almost dark with its intensity. The Dark Lord held it in a two-handed grip, his stance shifting into something ancient and practiced. "You have made your choice," Vader said, and beneath the mechanical voice Thor heard something almost like satisfaction. "So be it." The Dark Lord of the Sith and the God of Thunder faced each other across the crater as the last light faded from Rannon IV's sky, and the galaxy held its breath. Vader moved first, closing the distance between them with force-enhanced speed that would have appeared as a blur to unenhanced eyes. The crimson lightsaber came down in a vertical slash, a strike designed to cleave Thor from shoulder to hip, not a testing blow, not a warning, but an execution delivered with the precision of a master who had killed thousands. Stormbreaker rose to meet it. The weapons collided with a sound like reality screaming, a cacophony of energies that sent shockwaves rippling across the desert. Lightning exploded from the point of impact, cascading down Vader's blade and across his armor in brilliant arcs of blue-white destruction. The Dark Lord's breathing apparatus sparked, his cape billowing from the electromagnetic discharge, but he did not retreat. Instead, he pressed forward, mechanical strength augmented by the force pushing against Thor's guard with relentless pressure. Thor held his ground, lightning intensifying around him until he stood at the center of a pillar of pure electrical fury. "You fight well," he acknowledged through gritted teeth. "But you face the son of Odin. I have battled across the 9 realms. Your blade will not break what was forged to kill a Titan." Vader said nothing, his breathing apparatus maintaining its mechanical rhythm even as sparks cascaded across his armor. He disengaged suddenly, spinning left with a horizontal slash aimed at Thor's midsection. The God of Thunder leaped backward, Stormbreaker coming down to deflect the strike, then countered with an overhead chop that would have split armor and flesh alike. The Dark Lord brought his lightsaber up at the last possible instant, catching Stormbreaker's blade and redirecting it past his shoulder. The displacement was minimal, economical, a testament to technique refined over decades. Vader didn't waste energy on dramatic deflections or flashy movements. Every motion served a purpose, every strike probed for weakness with surgical efficiency. They separated, circling each other, the ground between them scorched and smoking from the energies unleashed in those first exchanges. Around the crater's perimeter, Imperial soldiers had backed away, their weapons lowered, recognizing instinctively that their blasters would be less than useless in a clash of this magnitude. Commander Tarn barked orders into his comm, calling for reinforcements, orbital support, anything that might tip the scales, but his voice carried the hollow tone of a man who knew such efforts would be futile. This was a battle between forces that transcended conventional military power. "Your strength is considerable," Vader admitted, his mechanical voice unchanged despite the exertion. "Greater than any Force-sensitive I have encountered. But strength alone does not determine victory. The Force grants me power beyond mere physical might." He extended his left hand, and the very air around Thor solidified. The Force wrapped around the God of Thunder like invisible chains, binding his arms to his sides, crushing inward with pressure that would have compacted a starfighter into scrap metal. Vader's fist clenched, and Thor felt the telekinetic grip tighten, felt the Force trying to compress his ribs, collapse his lungs, break his bones through sheer metaphysical pressure. Thor's eyes blazed with electric fury, and his entire body became lightning. Not generating it, not channeling it, becoming it. His physical form transformed into pure electrical energy, every atom of his being converted into the fundamental force he commanded. The Force grip passed through him harmlessly, unable to grasp what had no solid state. In this form, Thor was untouchable, a being of pure energy that existed in a state between matter and force. He flowed forward like a lightning bolt given consciousness, reforming directly in front of Vader with Stormbreaker already swinging in a devastating arc. The Dark Lord barely got his lightsaber up in time, the impact driving him backward across the sand, his boots carving furrows in the earth as he struggled to maintain balance. Thor pressed his advantage, raining down blows with Stormbreaker, each strike powerful enough to dent durasteel and shatter stone. Lightning poured from the weapon with each impact, arcing across Vader's armor, seeking any gap in the sophisticated technology that kept the Dark Lord alive. The breathing apparatus sparked again, one of the chest plate indicators flickering dangerously. But Vader adapted. He stopped trying to match strength with strength, instead using the Force to enhance his agility, his precognition warning him of strikes milliseconds before they landed. He wove between Thor's attacks like smoke, his lightsaber deflecting rather than blocking, redirecting kinetic energy rather than absorbing it. It was a fighting style born from necessity. The Dark Lord's armor was sophisticated, but it was also life support, vulnerable to the kind of overwhelming electrical assault Thor commanded. Vader lunged forward, his blade finding the gap between Thor's strikes, scoring a line across the Asgardian's shoulder plate. The lightsaber's plasma cut through the outer layer of Thor's armor, the heat intense enough to make even divine flesh recoil. It was the first blood of the engagement, barely a scratch, but proof that Vader's weapon could harm him. Thor grinned fiercely. Now this is a proper fight. He channeled lightning directly through Stormbreaker, the weapon becoming a conduit for power that would have vaporized ordinary steel. When he brought the axe down, it wasn't just the physical impact Vader had to worry about but the electrical discharge that turned the sand around them to glass, that ionized the air itself until breathing became difficult even for enhanced lungs. Vader weathered the assault, his armor's insulation systems working overtime, but Thor could see the strain. The breathing apparatus cycled faster, the mechanical rhythm speeding up as damaged components struggled to maintain function. The Dark Lord's movements, while still precise, had lost a fraction of their fluidity. But Vader was not called the Emperor's enforcer without reason. If Thor had greater raw power, the Dark Lord possessed something equally dangerous, ruthless tactical intelligence and a willingness to exploit any advantage, no matter how brutal. Vader's hand shot out again, not toward Thor but toward the perimeter. Commander Tarn rose into the air, lifted by the force, his arms and legs flailing as invisible power seized him. The soldier's scream cut through the desert air as Vader drew him closer, using the man as a living shield between himself and Thor. "Your attack," Vader said calmly, his breathing apparatus cycling with mechanical regularity. "Will you strike through an innocent to reach me? Or will you prove yourself bound by the same weakness that destroyed the Jedi? Compassion that stays the hand when ruthlessness is required?" Thor's expression hardened, lightning still dancing across his shoulders, but he lowered Stormbreaker slightly. "You would hide behind your own soldier? Use those sworn to serve you as shields? This is the honor of your empire?" "Honor," Vader said, and there was something cold and terrible in his mechanical voice, "is a luxury afforded to those who have already won. I deal in absolutes. Victory or defeat. Power or weakness. There is no middle ground." He flung Commander Tarn aside with casual contempt, the soldier's body slamming into the sand with bone-breaking force. Before Thor could check on the man, Vader was already in motion, his lightsaber carving through the air in a complex series of strikes that forced Thor back on the defensive. But something had changed in Thor's demeanor. Where before he had fought with the fierce joy of a warrior testing his strength against a worthy opponent, now there was something colder in his eyes, something that remembered the countless tyrants he had faced across the cosmos, beings who justified cruelty through philosophy, who dressed oppression in the language of necessity. "You speak of absolutes," Thor said, parrying a strike that would have taken his head. "Of power without compassion, strength without mercy. I have heard such words before, Vader. From frost giants who justified conquest through racial superiority. From dark elves who would have plunged the 9 realms into eternal darkness for the sake of reclaiming their ancient dominion. From a titan who believed he could save the universe through genocide." He caught Vader's blade on Stormbreaker's haft, holding it locked there, bringing his face close to the Dark Lord's expressionless mask. They all believed themselves justified. They all thought their power gave them the right to determine the fate of others. And they all fell, because power without wisdom is merely tyranny in different armor. For a moment, they stood locked together, lightning and lightsaber energy crackling between them. Then Vader spoke, and beneath the mechanical voice Thor heard something, not quite regret, not quite pain, but the echo of something human that had once existed before being burned away. "You speak of wisdom as if you understand the choices that create monsters. You know nothing of the price paid for power, the sacrifices required to prevent greater evil. The Jedi preached balance and compassion, and the galaxy burned. The Republic promised democracy and peace, and corruption festered in every corner. Only through strength, absolute, uncompromising strength, can order be maintained. And who ordered you to maintain it?" Thor countered. "Who decided that your vision of order was the only acceptable future? You speak of preventing evil, but from where I stand, you have become the very thing you claim to fight against." Vader's only response was to release another wave of force energy, pushing Thor backward with telekinetic power. But this time Thor was ready, lightning forming a barrier around him that disrupted the force waves like electromagnetic interference breaking up a comm signal. The two powers collided, canceling each other out, leaving both warriors breathing heavily in the center of devastation. Around them, the crater had been transformed into a hellscape of fused glass and smoking earth. Several of the Imperial transports had been overturned by the shockwaves from their battle. Fires burned where lightning had struck too close to fuel cells. And the soldiers, those who remained conscious, watched with a mixture of terror and awe as two beings of immense power fought to a standstill. "You cannot win this fight," Vader said, his breathing apparatus cycling rapidly now, damage taking its toll. "Even if you kill me, the Empire will send others. Star destroyers orbit this world. They will bombard the surface until nothing remains. Your power means nothing against orbital superiority. And your threats mean nothing to one who has survived the vacuum of space," Thor replied, his own breathing heavy but controlled. "I could weather your bombardment, Vader. Could you?" The truth of that statement hung between them. Thor was, functionally, invulnerable to most conventional weapons. Vader, for all his power, was still a man, a crippled man sustained by sophisticated technology that could be destroyed, systems that could fail. An orbital bombardment might eliminate Thor's ability to remain on this world, but it would certainly kill Darth Vader. The Dark Lord seemed to recognize this tactical reality. His lightsaber lowered slightly, though he maintained his combat stance. "What do you want, Thor of Asgard? You claim to seek passage home, yet you stand against the Empire's authority. You display power that could serve the Emperor, yet you reject the offer of service. If you truly wish to depart this galaxy, why prolong this conflict?" It was the first reasonable question Vader had asked, the first indication that perhaps negotiation was possible. Thor considered his response carefully, aware that his next words might determine whether this fight ended in mutual destruction or something approaching understanding. "I want what I stated from the beginning," Thor said finally. "Information about this galaxy's physical laws, its dimensional boundaries, access to technology or knowledge that might help me recreate the Bifrost or open a passage home. In exchange, I offer no threat to your empire, no interference in your politics. I will depart and never return. And if such knowledge or technology does not exist?" Vader asked. "If you are trapped here permanently?" Thor was silent for a long moment, lightning still crackling softly around him. That possibility had been growing in his mind since his arrival, the terrible realization that he might never see Asgard again, never return to New Asgard on Midgard, never rejoin the Avengers or honor the memory of those he had lost. "Then I will find my own path," he said quietly. "But it will not be as the Empire's servant or prisoner." Vader studied him through that expressionless mask, and Thor could almost feel the Dark Lord's mind working, calculating angles, assessing possibilities. Finally, Vader deactivated his lightsaber, the crimson blade retracting with a hiss that seemed loud in the sudden silence. "The Emperor will want to see you," Vader said. "To evaluate the threat you represent and the potential value you might offer. This is not a request you can refuse, the alternative is the destruction of this garrison and continued pursuit across the galaxy. But if you come willingly, demonstrate that you can be reasoned with rather than simply being a force of chaos, there may be opportunity for negotiation." Thor lowered Stormbreaker, though he did not dismiss the lightning entirely. "Take me to your Emperor, then. Let me judge for myself whether your empire deserves respect or opposition. But know this, Vader, I have bowed to tyrants before only to overthrow them when their true nature revealed itself. Do not assume my cooperation implies submission." "I assume nothing where you are concerned," Vader replied. "You have proven yourself, unprecedented. The Emperor will find that either fascinating or intolerable. For your sake, hope for the former." The Dark Lord turned and walked toward his shuttle, his breathing apparatus returning to its normal mechanical rhythm, though Thor noticed a slight hitch in the cycle, damage not yet repaired. Vader paused at the boarding ramp and looked back. "Commander Tarn requires medical attention. See to it before we depart." Then he disappeared into his ship, leaving Thor standing in the center of devastation, wondering if he had made a strategic decision or a terrible mistake. The journey to the Imperial Star Destroyer took 3 hours aboard Vader's shuttle, enough time for Thor to contemplate the magnitude of what he had agreed to. Through the viewport, he watched Rannon 4 shrink beneath them, a wounded world of industrial scars and exhausted resources, before the shuttle climbed beyond the atmosphere into the cold void of space. And there, hanging against the infinite darkness like monuments to Imperial power, waited the fleet. Thor had seen armadas before. He had stood on Asgard's Rainbow Bridge and watched the Bifrost deploy legions across the 9 realms. He had fought beside the Avengers as Chitauri warships blackened New York's sky. He had witnessed Thanos' Sanctuary 2 casting its shadow over Wakanda's fields. But the sheer scale of Imperial military might assembled in orbit above a single mining world still impressed him despite himself. 6 Star Destroyers hung in formation, each one a wedge-shaped titan stretching over a kilometer from stern to bow. Their hulls bristled with weapons, turbolaser batteries, ion cannons, tractor beam projectors, launch bays for fighters that could deploy by the hundreds. Smaller vessels moved between them like schools of metal fish, patrol craft, transports, communications frigates, all conducting the endless business of maintaining an interstellar empire's grip on its territories. The largest Star Destroyer, the one toward which Vader's shuttle now accelerated, bore distinctive markings along its hull, the Devastator, if Thor understood the basic script correctly. This was Vader's flagship, the mobile fortress from which the Dark Lord projected Imperial authority across the galaxy. Vader had said nothing during the flight, simply standing near the pilot's compartment with his arms crossed, his mechanical breathing the only sound breaking the silence. Thor had used the time to tend to his own injuries. The lightsaber burn on his shoulder was minor, already healing, but it served as a reminder that for all his power, he was not invulnerable to this galaxy's weapons. The thought was both humbling and tactically valuable. The shuttle entered the Devastator's main hangar through an atmospheric shield that shimmered blue as they passed through. The bay beyond was cavernous, easily capable of holding 50 vessels this shuttle's size. Rows of TIE fighters hung from ceiling racks like sleeping bats, their distinctive hexagonal panels and spherical cockpits giving them an insectoid appearance. Ground crews moved with military precision, servicing craft, loading munitions, conducting the endless maintenance that kept war machines operational. The shuttle touched down with barely a tremor, landing struts engaging smoothly. Vader moved to the boarding ramp before it had fully extended, clearly expecting Thor to follow. The God of Thunder gripped Stormbreaker and descended into the heart of Imperial power. The hangar fell silent as he emerged. Hundreds of personnel, pilots, technicians, officers, stormtroopers, all stopped their tasks and turned to stare at the figure walking beside Darth Vader. Word had clearly spread about what happened on Rannon 4. Thor could read it in their body language, the way they instinctively backed away, the nervous energy that rippled through the assembled personnel like wind across water. They had heard that someone fought the Dark Lord to a standstill and survived. Vader seemed unconcerned by the attention, simply striding toward the main corridor with his cape billowing behind him. Thor followed, taking in every detail of his surroundings with the tactical awareness learned from 1,500 years of potential combat situations. The Devastator was impressive, the corridors were wide enough to move heavy equipment, the lighting harsh and functional, every surface speaking to military efficiency over comfort or aesthetics. Stormtroopers lined the hallways at regular intervals, standing at attention as Vader passed. None moved, none spoke, but Thor felt their eyes tracking him through those emotionless helmets. He was a specimen, an anomaly, something that didn't fit into their understanding of how the galaxy worked. They took a turbolift, a vertical transport chamber that accelerated upward with stomach-lurching speed. Vader input coordinates on a control panel, and the lift climbed toward the Devastator's command tower, the highest point on the massive vessel. "The Emperor awaits on Coruscant," Vader said suddenly, breaking the silence. "We will make the jump to hyperspace within the hour. The journey will take approximately 1 standard day. You will be confined to quarters during transit, comfortable quarters, but guarded. Do not interpret this as trust." "I would not have expected trust," Thor replied. "We are adversaries who have agreed to temporary ceasefire, nothing more." "But tell me," this Emperor of yours? What manner of being commands one such as you to service? Vader's breathing apparatus cycled several times before he answered. Emperor Palpatine is the most powerful Force user in the galaxy. He sees through deception, commands loyalty through strength, and has orchestrated events across decades to create the order we now enjoy. He was Chancellor of the Republic during the Clone Wars, guided us through that chaos, and revealed the Jedi treachery that would have plunged civilization into darkness. Thor heard what Vader said, but he also heard what the Dark Lord didn't say, the careful phrasing, the rehearsed quality of the explanation. This was doctrine, not personal belief. Or perhaps it had been personal belief once, repeated so many times that Vader himself no longer knew whether he truly believed it or simply needed to believe it. And you serve him willingly? Thor pressed. I serve the Empire, Vader said, and there was steel in that mechanical voice. The Emperor's vision has brought stability where there was chaos, order where there was corruption. My service is necessary. The turbolift doors opened onto a corridor markedly different from the lower decks. Here the walls were dark metal instead of standard gray, the lighting deliberately dim, creating an atmosphere of perpetual twilight. They passed meditation chambers sealed behind glass doors, equipment rooms humming with technology Thor didn't recognize, and finally arrived at a suite of quarters near the command bridge. The door hissed open, revealing a space that was surprisingly generous by military standards. A large central room with seating, a viewport showing the stars beyond, a sleeping area separated by a partition, and what appeared to be facilities for hygiene and food preparation. It was a gilded cage, comfortable but unquestionably a cage. You will remain here, Vader instructed. Food will be provided. Medical attention if required. Attempting to leave will result in immediate containment, gas weapons first, then lethal force if necessary. The Devastator carries enough firepower to reduce you to atoms before you could reach critical systems. Remember that. Thor stepped into the quarters, examining the space with a warrior's eye for potential escape routes and defensive positions. The viewport was transparent steel, likely reinforced to withstand weapons fire. The door was a single point of ingress and egress, easily guarded. The ventilation system was too small for him to traverse. Vader had thought this through carefully. One question before you go, Thor said, turning to face the Dark Lord. On Rannon 4, you spoke of absolutes, of power being the only truth that matters. Yet you serve another, follow his commands, bend your strength to his will. How do you reconcile this philosophy with subordination? For a long moment Vader simply stood in the doorway, his breathing apparatus cycling with mechanical regularity. When he finally spoke, his voice carried something Thor hadn't heard before, not quite doubt, but a weariness that suggested the question was one the Dark Lord had asked himself more times than he cared to admit. Power takes many forms. Some wield it directly, through force and domination. Others wield it through vision and manipulation, moving pieces on a board so vast that even the pieces themselves do not recognize they are being played. I am the Emperor's instrument because together we accomplish what neither could achieve alone. That is not subordination. That is strategy. And if you discovered your Emperor's vision was not what you believed it to be? Thor asked quietly. If the order you enforce was purchased with innocent blood? What then? Vader's hand moved to his lightsaber hilt, not drawing it, but resting there, a gesture that might have been threat or might simply have been reflexive comfort. Then it would already be too late to matter. The choices that define us are made long before we recognize their consequences. We become what we must to survive what we have done. He turned and walked away, the door hissing shut behind him, leaving Thor alone with those final cryptic words. The God of Thunder moved to the viewport, looking out at the star field beyond. Somewhere out there, beyond this galaxy entirely, was home. Asgard, or what remained of it. New Asgard on Midgard's Norway coast, where his people rebuilt after Ragnarok and Thanos' devastation. The Avengers, scattered but enduring. A universe that knew his name and his deeds. Here, he was an anomaly. A disruption in the natural order. A potential threat to be evaluated, studied, contained, or eliminated. The Devastator's engines rumbled to life, vibrations traveling through the deck plates beneath his feet. Thor felt the shift as the massive vessel began orienting itself, aligning for the jump to hyperspace. Through the viewport, stars began to elongate, stretching into lines of light as the Star Destroyer's hyperdrive engaged. Then reality twisted, and they were traveling faster than light through a dimension where normal spacetime laws no longer applied. The viewport showed a tunnel of swirling energy, beautiful and terrible, completely unlike the Bifrost's rainbow bridge but serving a similar purpose, faster than light travel across impossible distances. Thor sat on one of the provided chairs and set Stormbreaker across his knees, letting his hands rest on the weapon's familiar surface. He had been in worse situations, trapped in more hostile environments, faced longer odds. He would meet this Emperor, assess the true nature of this empire, and decide whether cooperation or opposition served the greater good. But Vader's final words echoed in his mind, spoken with the weariness of someone who had long ago stopped believing in redemption: "We become what we must to survive what we have done." Thor had seen that pattern before, in beings who had committed atrocities and then built philosophies to justify them rather than face the horror of their own actions. Thanos had been like that, convinced that genocide was mercy, that the murder of trillions served a greater purpose. The Mad Titan had died still believing in his twisted vision. Was Vader the same? A monster who had convinced himself that evil in service of order was somehow noble? Or was he something more tragic, a man who had recognized the monster he had become but lacked the strength or will to change course? Time would tell. For now, Thor could only wait as the Devastator carried him toward the Empire's heart, toward Coruscant and the Emperor who ruled this galaxy with an iron fist concealed in sophisticated rhetoric. The door chimed softly, interrupting his thoughts. A panel slid aside to reveal a serving droid, a bipedal automaton with multiple manipulator arms bearing a tray of food. The droid entered with mechanical efficiency, set the tray on a table, and departed without a word. Clearly Vader had meant it about providing sustenance. Thor examined the offering: some kind of roasted meat, vegetables he didn't recognize, a grain-based side dish, and a container of water. Basic fare, but properly prepared. He ate slowly, savoring flavors that were alien yet not unpleasant, using the time to center himself mentally for what lay ahead. The hours passed with painful slowness. Thor meditated as Asgardian warriors were taught, focusing on the flow of power through his body, ensuring the lightning that sustained him remained under precise control. He practiced forms with Stormbreaker in the limited space, keeping his reflexes sharp. He studied every centimeter of his quarters, looking for weaknesses that might be exploited if escape became necessary. And he thought about home. About the Avengers, scattered after Thanos' defeat but still united in purpose. About New Asgard, his people rebuilding under Valkyrie's leadership. About the universe he had sworn to protect, now impossibly distant across dimensional barriers he didn't yet understand. A soft announcement over the ship's comm system broke his contemplation: "All hands, prepare for reversion to real space. Coruscant approach in T-5 minutes." Thor moved to the viewport as the hyperspace tunnel began to collapse, stars resuming their normal appearance as the Devastator dropped back into conventional spacetime. And there, ahead of them, hanging against the infinite black like a jewel-catching light, was Coruscant. It was a city. Not a city on a planet, but a city that was the entire planet. From pole to pole, every visible surface had been built upon, paved over, covered with structures that rose kilometers into the atmosphere. Billions of lights glittered across that manufactured surface, traffic lanes carrying endless streams of vehicles through canyon-like gaps between towers. It was the ultimate expression of civilization conquering nature, of intelligence reshaping an entire world to serve its purposes. It was magnificent and terrible in equal measure. The Devastator joined a queue of ships approaching Coruscant's upper atmosphere, each vessel waiting its turn to enter the carefully controlled traffic patterns that prevented collisions in the planet city's perpetual congestion. Thor could see other star destroyers, smaller Imperial vessels, civilian freighters, luxury yachts, the full spectrum of galactic civilization flowing in and out of the Empire's capital. The door to his quarters hissed open without warning. Vader stood in the corridor, flanked by 6 stormtroopers carrying weapons Thor now recognized as heavier models than standard issue. "We have arrived," Vader announced. "The Emperor has granted you audience. You will accompany me to the Imperial Palace. Remember what I told you, Emperor Palpatine sees through deception. Do not attempt to lie to him. Do not attempt to manipulate him. State your purpose clearly and truthfully. Your survival depends on his evaluation of whether you represent value or threat." Thor rose, Stormbreaker in hand, meeting Vader's expressionless mask with steady resolve. "Then let us not keep your Emperor waiting. I am curious to meet the being who commands such absolute loyalty from one as powerful as you." They departed the quarters and made their way toward the hangar bay, where another shuttle waited to carry them down to Coruscant surface, to the palace where the most powerful force user in the galaxy waited to judge whether the God of Thunder would live or die. The Imperial Palace rose from Coruscant surface like a dark mountain given geometric form, its towers and battlements dwarfing even the massive skyscrapers that surrounded it. What had once been the Jedi Temple, though Thor didn't know this history, had been transformed into a fortress of Imperial power, its architecture deliberately imposing, designed to make any visitor feel insignificant before approaching the throne. Vader's shuttle descended through layers of traffic, passing through multiple security checkpoints where scanning systems examined every molecule of the vessel before granting passage. The closer they came to the palace, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Thor felt it through the viewport, not just the physical weight of countless tons of duracrete and steel, but something else, something that pressed against his senses like psychic pressure. The dark side of the Force saturated this place. Whatever corruption Vader carried within him was merely an echo of what dwelled here at the Empire's heart. The shuttle landed on a private platform high up the palace's central spire, a landing pad reserved for only the most important arrivals. Vader rose from his seat with mechanical precision, his breathing apparatus cycling steadily despite what Thor suspected was significant pain from their earlier battle. The Dark Lord had not sought medical attention during the journey, hadn't shown any weakness, but Thor's warrior instincts recognized the subtle signs, slight hesitation in certain movements, careful distribution of weight to favor his less damaged side. Vader was injured, but would never admit it. Pride, or perhaps fear of showing vulnerability in front of his master. "Follow exactly 3 paces behind me," Vader instructed as the boarding ramp extended. "Do not speak unless the Emperor addresses you directly. Do not make sudden movements. The royal guard surrounding the throne room are trained to kill anything they perceive as a threat, and they do not require orders to act." Thor nodded his understanding, gripping Stormbreaker with casual readiness. If this meeting went poorly, he would need every advantage speed could provide. They descended into a corridor of polished black stone, the walls carved with Imperial insignia and inscriptions in languages Thor didn't recognize. Red armored guards stood at intervals. These were different from stormtroopers, their armor more ornate, their presence more menacing. Each one carried a force pike crackling with energy, and their helmets tracked Thor's movement with mechanical precision. The Royal Guard. Elite protectors who had sworn their lives to the Emperor's defense. The corridor opened into an antechamber where more guards waited, and beyond them, massive doors of dark metal etched with symbols that hurt to look at too directly. Sith runes, though Thor had no name for them, sigils of power and dominion carved by hands that understood the architecture of suffering. Vader approached the doors, which began to open with ponderous weight, revealing the throne room beyond. It was vast, designed to overwhelm through sheer scale. The ceiling soared dozens of meters overhead, supported by pillars carved from single pieces of stone. The floor was polished to mirror brightness, reflecting the minimal lighting and creating the illusion of infinite depth. And at the far end, approached by a long walkway, sat the throne itself, an imposing seat of black metal positioned atop a raised dais. And in that throne sat Emperor Palpatine. Even at this distance, Thor could feel the power radiating from that seated figure. Where Vader's presence had been like an ocean of dark power, vast and crushing, the Emperor was something else entirely, a black hole of force energy, drawing everything toward him, consuming light and hope and leaving only the cold certainty of his absolute dominion. Vader walked forward with measured steps, his cape dragging behind him, his breathing apparatus echoing in the cavernous space. Thor followed exactly 3 paces back as instructed, every sense alert, every nerve prepared for violence if negotiation failed. As they drew closer, details emerged. The Emperor was old, ancient even by galactic standards, his face deeply lined and marked by decay that spoke to power used without restraint. His eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light, the same corruption Thor had seen in Inquisitor Varn but magnified 1,000-fold. He wore robes of black and deep crimson, and his hands, pale, almost skeletal, rested on the throne's armrests with casual authority. But it was those eyes that held Thor's attention. They looked at him not with curiosity or caution, but with the cold evaluation of a predator assessing prey. This was a being who had lived decades, perhaps centuries, accumulating power and crushing anything that threatened it. Thor had seen that look before, in Hela's eyes when she had returned to claim Asgard's throne. The look of someone who believed they had transcended morality through sheer force of will. Vader stopped at the base of the dais and dropped to one knee, his head bowed in submission. "Master, I bring you the anomaly. Thor of Asgard, as commanded." Thor remained standing, Stormbreaker held in a neutral position but ready to be raised in an instant. He would not kneel. Had not knelt even when facing Odin's judgment, would not start now before a stranger who ruled through fear regardless of the sophisticated words used to justify it. Palpatine's yellow eyes tracked this defiance, and a thin smile crossed his withered features. When he spoke, his voice was surprisingly gentle, almost grandfatherly, carrying none of the mechanical distortion of Vader's vocabulary but somehow more unsettling for its humanity. "Rise, Lord Vader. You have done well in bringing our guest to me intact." The Emperor's gaze never left Thor. "And you, Thor of Asgard, display impressive courage. Or impressive arrogance. Few stand in the presence of the Empire's authority without showing proper respect." "I mean no disrespect," Thor said carefully, his voice carrying easily in the vast chamber. "But I am a prince of Asgard, and I kneel only to those who have earned such deference through wisdom and just rule. You have given me no opportunity to evaluate whether you merit such honor." Vader's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his lightsaber, a warning, or perhaps preparation to strike down the insolent outsider. But Palpatine raised one pale hand, staying his apprentice with a gesture. "Fascinating," the Emperor purred. "You speak of wisdom and justice as if they are absolutes, universal constants that apply across all civilizations. But you are not from this galaxy, are you?" Lord Vader's report was illuminating. "Travel between dimensions, power independent of the Force, technology that defies our understanding of physical law. You are either the most elaborate deception I have encountered in decades, or you are precisely what you claim to be, a being from beyond our reality." "I am what I claim," Thor confirmed. "The Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that connects the 9 realms of my reality, malfunctioned during my travel. I was cast through dimensional barriers I barely understand, and I arrived in your galaxy by accident, not design. I seek only the knowledge or technology to return home. I have no interest in your empire's politics." Palpatine leaned forward slightly, his yellow eyes gleaming with interest that was almost academic. "And yet you fought Lord Vader to a standstill. Impressive, considering he has eliminated every other Force-sensitive challenger who has stood against him in the past 2 decades. Your power is considerable, Thor Odinson. Power enough to change the balance of galactic civilization if properly applied. Or properly opposed," Thor added quietly. "Power is neutral, Emperor. How it is wielded determines whether it serves creation or destruction." "Ah, but there you reveal your naivety," Palpatine said, and his voice took on a lecturing quality, as if explaining obvious truths to a child. "Creation and destruction are not opposites, they are parts of the same cycle. The old Republic was corrupt, bloated with bureaucracy and inefficiency. It had to be destroyed so that the Empire could be created. The Jedi claimed to serve peace, but they hoarded power and manipulated galactic politics from the shadows. They had to be eliminated so that true order could emerge. He rose from his throne with surprising grace for someone so ancient, descending the dais steps with his hands clasped before him. You speak of justice, but justice is defined by whoever possesses the strength to enforce their definition. You speak of wisdom, but wisdom without power to implement it is merely philosophy, pretty words that accomplish nothing. Thor watched the Emperor approach, noting how even Vader seemed to tense as his master drew nearer. There was something predatory in Palpatine's movements, something that suggested the frail appearance was deceptive, that underneath that aged exterior lurked power that could manifest with devastating speed. I have seen this argument before, Thor said. On other worlds, in other times. Tyrants always believe their tyranny is necessary, that only through absolute control can chaos be prevented. But I have also seen what becomes of civilizations built on such foundations. They collapse, inevitably, because fear is not sustainable. Eventually, those crushed beneath the tyrant's heel find the courage to resist. Palpatine stopped 3 meters from Thor, close enough that the God of Thunder could see every line in that withered face, every flicker of darkness in those yellow eyes. And you believe yourself qualified to judge the Empire? You, who have been in this galaxy for less than 2 standard days. You know nothing of the Clone Wars, nothing of the chaos that threatened to tear civilization apart. You did not witness the Jedi's betrayal, their attempt to seize power when the Republic was at its most vulnerable. I know that victors write history, Thor countered. That convenient narratives are constructed to justify actions that might otherwise be questioned. I do not claim to know the full truth of your galaxy's past, Emperor. But I recognize the patterns of consolidation, how crisis is used to justify extraordinary measures, how temporary powers become permanent, how security concerns are weaponized to crush dissent. For a long moment, Palpatine simply stared at him, and Thor felt the weight of the Emperor's attention like physical pressure. The Force swirled around them both, and Thor realized with sudden clarity that Palpatine was reading him, probing at the edges of his mind with invisible fingers, seeking weakness, seeking leverage, seeking any opening that could be exploited. But the God of Thunder's mind had been forged in Asgard's unique environment, tempered by centuries of experience with mental manipulation, Loki's tricks, Wanda's chaos magic, Thanos's will pressing against his consciousness in their final battle. His thoughts were his own, protected by will older than most civilizations in this galaxy. Palpatine's eyes narrowed fractionally, the only sign that his probe had been rebuffed. Interesting. Your mind is, remarkably resistant. Not through force training, but through something else entirely. You truly are from beyond this galaxy. I have never lied to you, Thor said simply. No, Palpatine agreed. You have not. Which brings us to the central question, what am I to do with you, Thor Odinson? You represent a variable I cannot fully control, power I cannot completely predict. Such variables are dangerous to order, to stability. The simplest solution would be elimination, orbital bombardment, perhaps, or luring you to a location where the full might of the Imperial military could be brought to bear. Lightning flickered across Thor's shoulders, an unconscious response to the threat. You could try. But as Lord Vader can attest, I do not die easily. And I would not go quietly. No, I suspect you would not. Palpatine smiled again, and there was something genuinely amused in the expression. Which is why I propose an alternative. You seek knowledge to return home. The Empire possesses the most extensive scientific archives in the galaxy, data on hyperspace anomalies, dimensional rifts, exotic physics beyond standard models. We have studied phenomena that might relate to your predicament. Thor's eyes narrowed. In exchange for what? Service, Palpatine said simply. Not permanent service, not the absolute loyalty I require from Lord Vader and my other subordinates. But temporary cooperation. There are threats to Imperial stability, rebel cells, criminal organizations, regional warlords who refuse to acknowledge proper authority. You demonstrate your value by addressing such threats, and in return, you gain access to our archives and expertise. You want me to be your weapon, Thor said flatly. To crush your enemies while you search for ways to control or eliminate me. I want you to earn the resources you require, Palpatine corrected. Nothing is free, Thor Odinson. Not knowledge, not technology, not passage home. You are asking the Empire to dedicate significant scientific resources to solving a problem that benefits only you. Why should we do so without compensation? It was a reasonable argument, Thor had to admit, even as he recognized the trap within it. Once he began working for the Empire, even temporarily, he would be complicit in whatever atrocities they committed. He would become part of the system, his power used to reinforce Palpatine's authority. But what were his alternatives? Refuse and be hunted across the galaxy. Strike down the Emperor here and now, making himself enemy to an entire interstellar civilization. Wander aimlessly hoping to stumble upon dimensional knowledge that might not even exist. What guarantees do I have that you will honor this arrangement? Thor asked. That you will not simply use me until I am no longer convenient and then eliminate me? Palpatine spread his hands in a gesture of apparent openness. You have my word as Emperor. And more practically, you have the fact that eliminating you would be extraordinarily costly in both resources and personnel. It is far more efficient to maintain our arrangement than to break it. Pragmatism, Thor Odinson, is a far more reliable guarantee than honor or morality. Thor looked past the Emperor to where Vader stood at attention, the Dark Lord's expressionless mask revealing nothing. What would Vader do in this situation? But he already knew, Vader had long ago made his choice, had bent his strength to the Emperor's will, had become the instrument through which tyranny was enforced. Thor would not become another Vader. I will consider your offer, Thor said finally. But I require more information. Show me the nature of these threats you wish me to address. Let me evaluate whether they truly deserve opposition or whether they are simply those who refuse to accept your dominion. I will not be used as a bludgeon against the innocent. Palpatine's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too white in that withered face. Of course. Lord Vader will provide you with intelligence briefings. You may evaluate each situation and choose which to address. I am confident that even your rigid moral code will find some of the Empire's enemies worthy of your attention. He turned and walked back toward his throne, his robes rustling softly in the vast chamber. You will be given quarters in the palace complex. Comfortable accommodations, though guarded. Think carefully on my offer, Thor of Asgard. You are far from home, in a galaxy that owes you nothing. The path of cooperation leads toward your goal. The path of opposition leads only to death, yours, eventually, or that of countless Imperial personnel who would be sacrificed attempting to contain you. Thor understood the message clearly. Refuse, and Palpatine would throw endless soldiers at him, would accept massive casualties to eliminate the threat. The Emperor saw his own personnel as expendable resources, would spend lives like currency to achieve his objectives. It was monstrous. And tactically brilliant. I will review your intelligence, Thor said. And I will make my decision. But know this, Emperor, I am not so easily manipulated as you might believe. If I discover you have misrepresented the nature of these threats, our arrangement ends immediately. Fair enough, Palpatine said, settling back onto his throne. Lord Vader, escort our guest to his quarters. Ensure he has access to the briefing materials. And Thor Odinson, welcome to Coruscant. I suspect your time here will be educational. Vader gestured toward the exit, and Thor followed, feeling those yellow eyes tracking his every step until the massive doors closed behind them, sealing the throne room once more. In the corridor beyond, Vader stopped and turned to face Thor directly. You should have accepted immediately, the Dark Lord said, his mechanical voice carrying what might have been concern or might simply have been tactical advice. Hesitation suggests doubt. The Emperor despises doubt. Then he and I have something in common, Thor replied. Because I despise certainty that is unearned. Take me to these quarters, Vader. And to these briefings. Let us see if your empire's enemies are monsters, or simply those who refuse to live in chains. They walked through the palace corridors in tense silence, two beings of immense power trapped in an uneasy alliance, while somewhere behind them, Emperor Palpatine sat on his throne and contemplated how best to use or destroy the god who had fallen into his galaxy. The quarters provided to Thor in the Imperial Palace were luxurious by any standard, a suite of interconnected rooms with viewports overlooking Coruscant's endless cityscape, furnishings that spoke to wealth and refinement, technology integrated seamlessly into every surface. But luxury could not disguise the fact that 6 royal guards stood watch outside his door, that sensor arrays tracked his every movement, that he remained a prisoner regardless of how gilded the cage. Thor stood at the viewport as the planet city's artificial day faded into artificial night, billions of lights flickering to life across the urban landscape like stars brought down to ground level. Somewhere out there, among those countless towers and canyons of duracrete and steel, people lived their lives under Imperial rule. Did they prosper? Did they suffer? Were they grateful for the order the Empire provided, or did they dream of freedom from tyranny? He needed to know. Needed to see beyond the carefully constructed narrative Palpatine and Vader presented. A soft chime announced a visitor. Thor turned as the door slid open, admitting not Vader but a different figure, a human woman in an Imperial officer's uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a severe style, her posture military perfect. She carried a datapad and moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. Thor of Asgard, she said, offering a crisp nod that was not quite a salute. I am Admiral Versio, Imperial Intelligence. Lord Vader has instructed me to brief you on potential operational targets. May I enter? Thor gestured his permission, curious about this new player in the game. Admiral Versio moved to the central table and activated her datapad, projecting a holographic display into the air between them. The Empire maintains order across thousands of star systems, she began, her tone professional and matter-of-fact. But certain elements continue to resist Imperial authority, requiring ongoing military operations. I have been directed to present 3 scenarios for your evaluation. The hologram shifted, displaying a star map with several systems highlighted in red. Versio indicated the first one. Scenario 1, the Partisans of Saw Gerrera. A militant extremist organization operating in the Outer Rim territories. They employ terrorist tactics, bombings of civilian infrastructure, assassination of Imperial governors, destruction of supply convoys. Intelligence indicates they are planning an attack on a medical facility on Geonosis, targeting wounded Imperial personnel recovering from combat operations. The hologram showed surveillance footage, masked figures planting explosives, a facility exploding in a ball of flame, the aftermath of twisted metal and bodies. Thor's jaw tightened. If the intelligence was accurate, these were not freedom fighters but murderers targeting the wounded and defenseless. Scenario 2, Versio continued, shifting the display. The Zan Consortium. A criminal syndicate controlling illegal operations across a dozen sectors, slavery, spice trafficking, extortion, murder for hire. They have recently expanded into weapons smuggling, selling military-grade armaments to insurgent groups. Our intelligence suggests they are about to execute a mass abduction on Ryloth, targeting Twi'lek children for sale into slavery. More footage appeared, chained beings in cages, children torn from their families, auction blocks where sentient creatures were sold like livestock. Thor felt lightning begin to crackle unconsciously across his shoulders. Slavery. One of the few crimes that ignited his fury without qualification. Asgard had abolished such practices millennia ago, and Thor had personally ended slave operations on a dozen worlds during his travels. Scenario 3, Versio said, her voice remaining neutral despite the subject matter. The Rebel Alliance Command Cell on Dantooine. A military installation coordinating insurgent activities across multiple sectors. They are planning strikes against Imperial supply lines, attempting to destabilize trade routes that feed billions of Imperial citizens. Left unchecked, their operations could lead to widespread famine and economic collapse in dependent systems. This hologram showed what appeared to be a military base, hangars, barracks, command centers. Soldiers in orange flight suits preparing fighters. Command staff studying tactical displays. It looked less like terrorism and more like organized military resistance. Thor studied all three scenarios carefully, his tactical mind weighing the information against his experience with propaganda and selective intelligence presentation. "Admiral," he said quietly, "these briefings are designed to manipulate my response. The first two scenarios present clear villains, terrorists targeting wounded soldiers, slavers kidnapping children. The third presents a military target engaged in strategic operations against supply lines. You are testing whether I can distinguish between genuine threats and legitimate resistance." Versio's expression remained neutral, but Thor caught the slightest flicker of something, surprise. Respect, in her eyes. "Your assessment. The partisans bombing a medical facility, if that intelligence is accurate, have crossed lines that cannot be justified even in asymmetric warfare. Targeting the wounded violates the most basic codes of honorable combat. The Zan consortium engaging in slavery deserves elimination with extreme prejudice. But the Rebel Alliance?" Thor gestured to the hologram. "They are soldiers fighting a military campaign against what they perceive as oppression. That is not terrorism. That is war. War against legitimate imperial authority," Versio countered. "The empire was legally established through constitutional processes. The rebels reject democratic outcomes they disagree with and resort to violence to impose their minority will on the majority." "Was it democratic?" Thor asked sharply. "Or was it a chancellor accumulating emergency powers during crisis, then refusing to relinquish them when the crisis ended? I have seen this pattern before, Admiral. I have watched would-be tyrants wrap themselves in legal language while dismantling the very systems that gave them legitimacy." Versio was silent for a long moment, her hand moving unconsciously to her sidearm before stopping. "You tread dangerously close to sedition, Thor of Asgard." "I tread toward truth," Thor replied. "And I will not be used as a weapon against those whose only crime is refusing to accept tyranny. Show me actual threats, the slavers, the terrorists targeting civilians and wounded soldiers, the criminals who prey on the innocent. Those I will gladly oppose. But I will not strike down military forces engaged in legitimate resistance to authoritarian rule." The Admiral's expression hardened. "Then our discussion is concluded. I will inform Lord Vader that you have refused the Emperor's generous offer." "I have refused to be complicit in atrocity," Thor corrected. "There is a difference. Tell the Emperor I will address the Guerrera partisans if they truly intend to bomb a medical facility, and I will personally dismantle the Zan Consortium's slavery operations. But I will not attack the Rebel Alliance simply because they oppose Imperial dominion." Versio deactivated her datapad, the hologram disappearing. "You are naive if you think the Emperor will accept such selective cooperation. He does not negotiate with those who question his authority." "Then we will reach an impasse," Thor said calmly. "And he will learn that some beings cannot be bent to his will through threats or manipulation. I am the God of Thunder, Admiral. I have stood against cosmic powers that make your empire look like children playing at kingdoms. Palpatine's authority means nothing to me beyond what wisdom and justice it represents. If it represents neither, then it deserves no respect." The Admiral turned toward the door, then paused. When she spoke again, her voice was lower, almost conspiratorial. "A word of advice, Thor of Asgard. The Emperor is not accustomed to defiance. When he encounters resistance, he crushes it absolutely. Lord Vader was once a Jedi, did you know that? A hero, a general, someone who believed in justice and peace. The Emperor took that man and remade him into the weapon you fought on Rannon for. Do not assume you are immune to similar restructuring. She left before Thor could respond, the door sealing behind her with mechanical finality. Thor stood alone in his luxurious prison, lightning crackling softly around his clenched fists. So that was the game, present scenarios designed to make him complicit in Imperial operations, gradually compromise his principles through incremental cooperation, until he became another Vader, another weapon pointed at anyone who dared resist absolute authority. But Thor had not survived 1500 years by allowing others to define his choices. He moved to the viewport, looking out at Coruscant's glittering expanse, and made a decision. If Palpatine would not provide honest cooperation, Thor would find his own path. Somewhere in this galaxy-spanning city was information about dimensional physics, hyperspace anomalies, the kind of exotic science that might help him recreate the Bifrost or open a passage home. The Empire's archives existed somewhere in this vast palace complex. He would find them. With or without permission. The door chimed again, and Thor turned expecting another Imperial functionary with more manipulative intelligence briefings. Instead, the door opened to reveal Darth Vader himself, the Dark Lord's mechanical breathing filling the room with its rhythmic cycle. "The Emperor is displeased," Vader announced without preamble. "You reject his offer. You question Imperial authority. You speak of tyranny as if you understand the choices that created this order." He stepped fully into the room, his hand resting on his lightsaber hilt. "You are either extraordinarily brave or extraordinarily foolish." "Perhaps both," Thor admitted. "But I will not compromise what I am simply to make my situation more comfortable. I have seen too many civilizations collapse because good beings chose convenience over principle." Vader was silent for a long moment, his breathing apparatus the only sound. Then, surprisingly, he deactivated the door's security systems and moved to stand beside Thor at the viewport, looking out at the city below. "When I was young," Vader said quietly, his mechanical voice somehow carrying more humanity than Thor had heard before, "I believed that power could solve any problem. That if I became strong enough, skilled enough, I could protect everyone I cared about. I believed in justice, in peace, in the Jedi ideals of selflessness and compassion." He paused, and Thor heard something almost like pain beneath the mechanical distortion. "I was wrong. Power without the will to use it absolutely is merely weakness. Compassion that stays your hand when ruthlessness is required leads only to greater suffering. The Jedi fell because they were too merciful, too bound by their codes. The Republic collapsed because it was too democratic, too paralyzed by debate to act decisively. And so you became the Emperor's instrument," Thor said. "Traded compassion for ruthlessness, mercy for absolute action. Tell me, Vader, are you more powerful now than when you believed in those Jedi ideals? Or have you simply become what you once would have opposed?" Vader's hand tightened on his lightsaber hilt, and for a moment Thor thought the Dark Lord might actually attack him here in his quarters. But instead, Vader simply stood there, his breathing apparatus cycling faster, as if the conversation itself was causing him pain. "I am what I had to become," Vader finally said. "What circumstances made necessary. You speak of tyranny, but you have not seen the alternative, chaos, war, systems tearing themselves apart because they lack the strength to enforce order. The Empire provides stability. That stability requires sacrifices, yes. Compromises. But without it, the galaxy would burn. Would it?" Thor challenged. "Or is that simply what you tell yourself to justify the things you have done? I have met many beings who convinced themselves that evil in service of a greater good was somehow noble. They were all wrong, Vader. All of them. Because evil justified is still evil, and the moment you accept that compromise, you have already lost what you claimed to protect." Vader turned to face him fully, and Thor could feel the Dark Lord's attention focused like a laser, feel the force swirling around them both as Vader struggled with something, anger, doubt, the echo of a man who had once been different. "Why do you care?" Vader asked, and there was genuine confusion in the question. "You are not of this galaxy. These people are not your responsibility. You could accept the Emperor's terms, access the archives you need, and depart without concerning yourself with Imperial politics. Why throw away that opportunity for abstract principles regarding beings you do not know? Thor smiled, but there was sadness in the expression. Because that is what it means to be a hero, Vader. Not power, not strength, but the choice to stand for something larger than yourself even when it costs you everything. My father once told me that a true king, a true leader, seeks not the power to rule, but the wisdom to know when ruling becomes tyranny. The moment you stop questioning your own authority is the moment you become the villain in someone else's story. He turned from the viewport, meeting Vader's expressionless mask with steady conviction. I do not know if the Rebel Alliance are heroes or simply different tyrants waiting for their turn at power. I do not know the full truth of your Clone Wars or the Jedi's alleged betrayal. But I know that absolute power corrupts absolutely, that empires built on fear eventually collapse under the weight of their own cruelty. And I know that I will not be complicit in atrocity simply because it is convenient. For a long moment, Vader simply stood there, and Thor wondered what thoughts moved behind that mask, what remnants of the man he had been might still exist beneath the armor and the dark side corruption. Then Vader reactivated the door's security systems and walked toward the exit. At the threshold, he paused without turning around. The Emperor will not tolerate continued defiance. If you persist in refusing his authority, he will order your elimination regardless of the cost. And I will be the one commanded to carry out that execution. The mechanical breathing cycled several times. I do not wish to kill you, Thor of Asgard. You remind me of someone I knew long ago. Someone who believed in impossible ideals and fought for them despite overwhelming odds. That person is dead now. Do not force me to bury him twice by destroying you as well. Then he was gone, the door sealing, leaving Thor alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that his time for choosing was running out. Outside the viewport, Coruscant's endless city glittered like a galaxy brought to ground level, beautiful and terrible, ordered and oppressive, a monument to what civilization could achieve when it sacrificed freedom for security. Thor gripped Stormbreaker and began to plan. If the Emperor would not provide willing cooperation, then Thor would take what he needed and carve his own path home. And if that meant standing against the full might of the Galactic Empire, then so be it. He had faced worse odds before. The God of Thunder would not be caged, would not be bent, would not become another cautionary tale about power corrupting those who wielded it. The storm was coming to Coruscant. And Emperor Palpatine was about to learn what it meant to stand against divine wrath. The attack came at midnight by Coruscant's artificial cycles, when the palace was at its quietest and the guards had settled into the comfortable rhythms of routine. Thor had spent the hours since Vader's departure preparing, not for escape, but for something far more audacious. He was going to storm the Imperial archives. The plan was simple in concept, brutally direct in execution. Thor would break containment, fight through whatever security the palace could throw at him, locate the scientific archives, and search for any information that might help him understand dimensional physics well enough to recreate the Bifrost. He would have preferred negotiation, cooperation, a peaceful resolution where both parties benefited. But Palpatine had made it clear that cooperation meant submission, and Thor had never been very good at submission. He stood in the center of his quarters, Stormbreaker held in both hands, and called the lightning. It came eagerly, as if it had been waiting for this moment, cascading from his body in brilliant arcs that danced across every metallic surface. The sensor arrays embedded in the walls overloaded and exploded in showers of sparks. The door's locking mechanisms fused into slag. Emergency alarms wailed throughout the palace complex as power surges cascaded through the security grid. Thor raised Stormbreaker and brought it down against the reinforced door with the full force of divine strength. The metal buckled, tore, and finally shattered outward into the corridor beyond. The 6 royal guards positioned outside barely had time to raise their force pikes before lightning struck them simultaneously, overloading their armor systems and dropping them unconscious to the polished floor. Thor stepped over their bodies and into the corridor, every sense alert. He had perhaps minutes before the full weight of Imperial security descended upon him, minutes to find the archives, to locate what he needed, to secure some hope of ever seeing home again. He ran, Stormbreaker's energy illuminating the dark corridors as automated defenses activated. Turbolaser turrets emerged from hidden panels, tracking his movement, unleashing streams of plasma that would have reduced Durasteel to molten slag. Thor deflected the blasts with Stormbreaker, the energy weapon's fire no more effective against URU metal than Vader's lightsaber had been. He hurled lightning at the turrets, frying their targeting systems, leaving a trail of smoking wreckage in his wake. More royal guards appeared at corridor intersections, forming shield walls with their force pikes extended. Thor didn't slow down, he became lightning again, his physical form converting to pure electrical energy that flowed through their defenses like water through a net. He reformed behind them and struck with Stormbreaker, not to kill but to disable, sending armored bodies flying with each sweeping blow. An explosion rocked the corridor ahead, demolition charges deliberately detonated to collapse the passage, cutting off his advance. Thor summoned a storm wind, the same power that had allowed him to fly before he possessed Mjolnir, and propelled himself upward and over the debris field. He crashed through a reinforced viewport into an administrative section, alarms shrieking around him as Imperial personnel scrambled to evacuate. He needed direction. The palace complex was vast, a labyrinth of passages and chambers spread across multiple towers. Without guidance, he could wander for hours and never find the archives. A computer terminal sat on an abandoned desk. Thor smashed the login security with a pulse of electromagnetic energy and accessed the palace schematic. There, the Imperial Science Archives, 3 towers over and 40 levels down, buried deep within the structure where data could be protected from orbital bombardment or enemy infiltration. He memorized the route and was turning to leave when Vader's voice boomed through the corridor's speaker system, mechanical and inexorable. Thor of Asgard. You have committed treason against the Empire. Stand down immediately or face lethal response. This is your final warning. Thor looked up at the nearest security camera, knowing Vader watched through it. I gave you every opportunity for peaceful cooperation. Your Emperor chose manipulation over honesty, coercion over partnership. Now I take what I need. Do not stand in my way, Vader. I do not wish to kill you, but I will defend myself. Then you have made your choice. The speaker went dead, and Thor felt it, a massive surge in the force, dark power gathering like a storm front approaching. Vader was coming, and he would not be alone. Thor ran, following the route he had memorized, but everywhere he turned, resistance multiplied. Squads of stormtroopers materialized at every intersection, their blasters blazing. Automated defense systems activated in coordinated patterns, forcing him to fight through overlapping fields of fire. The palace itself seemed to be turning against him, doors sealing ahead of his advance, corridors flooding with paralytic gas, gravity fluctuating as artificial field generators were weaponized. He pressed forward through all of it, lightning blazing around him like a war god's aura, Stormbreaker carving through obstacles that technology alone could never have breached. But the delays were accumulating, precious minutes slipping away, and he could feel Vader's presence drawing closer with every second. Thor burst into a massive atrium that connected several tower sections, a vast open space surrounded by balconies and walkways. He was halfway across when the main entrance exploded inward, and Darth Vader strode through the smoke and debris like death incarnate. The Dark Lord had brought reinforcements, a full company of elite stormtroopers, their armor marked with the distinctive insignia of the Emperor's personal guard regiment. And flanking Vader were 4 Inquisitors, their lightsabers already ignited, crimson and orange blades casting dancing shadows across the atrium walls. You cannot win this fight, Vader announced, his breathing apparatus cycling steadily despite the exertion of rapid deployment. Surrender now. The Emperor has authorized me to accept your submission. Continue this rebellion, and you will die here. Thor planted Stormbreaker and let lightning cascade from his body in all directions, brilliant arcs that carved paths across the floor and up the walls. I am Thor, son of Odin, god of thunder, and I do not surrender to tyrants. If you want to stop me, Vader, you will have to kill me. And I promise you, I will not die easily. Vader's hand moved in a slashing gesture, and the Inquisitors attacked as one. They came at him from 4 directions simultaneously, their lightsabers weaving patterns of deadly light, their movements enhanced by the Force to superhuman speed and precision. Thor met them with Stormbreaker, the Uru axe's blade deflecting plasma with each strike, lightning exploding outward with every impact. He had fought against multiple opponents before, the Avenger in training, frost giants in the frozen wastes of Jotunheim, Thanos' children on the Statesman, and he knew the key was to never let them coordinate, to stay in constant motion, to turn their numbers into a disadvantage through superior positioning. He spun, Stormbreaker's blade catching one Inquisitor's lightsaber and redirecting it into another's path. Lightning arced from his free hand, striking a third in the chest and sending her tumbling backward. The fourth pressed his advantage, coming in low with a strike aimed at Thor's legs. Thor leaped, propelling himself upward with storm winds, and came down with an overhead blow that shattered the floor where the Inquisitor had been standing a millisecond before. But while Thor engaged the Inquisitors, Vader had not been idle. The Dark Lord raised both hands, and the Force seized every loose object in the atrium, chairs, debris, even chunks of the shattered floor, and hurled them at Thor in a coordinated barrage. Thor weathered the assault, lightning vaporizing smaller projectiles, Stormbreaker deflecting larger ones, but it forced him onto the defensive, slowing his momentum. The stormtroopers opened fire from elevated positions, their coordinated volleys creating crossfire that even Thor's speed and durability couldn't completely ignore. Blaster bolts seared across his armor, burning through outer layers, finding gaps where lightning hadn't created sufficient electromagnetic shielding. Pain blossomed across his ribs, his shoulder, his thigh, not critical injuries, but accumulating damage that would eventually take its toll. Thor roared and channeled everything he had into one massive electrical discharge. Lightning exploded from his body in a spherical wave that encompassed the entire atrium, arcing to every metallic surface, overloading every weapon and piece of technology in range. Stormtroopers collapsed as their armor systems failed. Inquisitors screamed as their lightsabers shorted out. Even Vader staggered, his breathing apparatus sparking dangerously. In the moment of chaos, Thor ran. He crashed through a side entrance, following the mental map toward the archives, knowing he had bought himself perhaps 30 seconds before pursuit resumed. The corridors here were utilitarian, stripped of the palace's usual grandeur. These were service passages, maintenance tunnels, the infrastructure that kept a massive complex functioning. And there, at the end of a long corridor, was the entrance to the Imperial Science Archives, a massive blast door marked with clearance codes and biometric security. Thor didn't bother with security protocols. He channeled lightning directly into the door's control systems, overloading them, then struck the metal with Stormbreaker. Once. Twice. 3 times, each blow denting the reinforced durasteel, until finally the door buckled and tore free from its frame. Beyond lay a vast chamber filled with data storage systems, crystalline matrices, holographic projectors, physical documents sealed in preservation fields. This was the Empire's collected scientific knowledge, everything they knew about the galaxy's physical laws, exotic phenomena, experimental research. Somewhere in this ocean of information was what Thor needed. He moved to the nearest terminal and placed his hand on the interface. Lightning flowed from his fingers into the system, not to destroy but to interface, to access, using electromagnetic manipulation to bypass security protocols and dive directly into the archive data. Information flooded into his consciousness, terabytes of research on hyperspace mechanics, quantum tunneling, dimensional barriers, exotic particle physics. And there, buried deep within classified research files, a project designation, Tesseract Analysis. The Empire had studied something called a Tesseract, an artifact capable of opening portals through space, possibly through dimensions. The research had been discontinued decades ago when the artifact disappeared, but the theoretical models remained. Thor downloaded everything he could, committing the data to memory with Asgardian mental discipline, absorbing equations and diagrams and experimental results. It wasn't complete, the Empire's understanding was fragmentary, theoretical rather than practical, but it was a starting point, a foundation upon which he might build his way home. The sound of mechanical breathing echoed through the chamber. Thor turned to find Vader standing at the destroyed entrance, his lightsaber ignited, his armor still smoking from the electrical assault but his stance unwavering. "It is over," Vader said. "You have the information you sought. Surrender now, and the Emperor may still show mercy." "Mercy?" Thor almost laughed. "Your Emperor knows nothing of mercy. Only domination masked as benevolence." "Then you will die," Vader stated simply, and attacked. This time there was no testing, no evaluation. Vader came at him with the full fury of the dark side, his lightsaber moving in patterns so fast it created afterimages, each strike carrying force-enhanced power that would have cleaved through anything less durable than URU metal. Thor met him blow for blow, Stormbreaker against lightsaber, lightning against force energy, two titans clashing in the heart of the Empire's knowledge repository. They fought through the archives, their battle destroying irreplaceable data, shattering crystalline storage matrices, setting fire to physical documents. Neither cared, this had transcended politics or tactics. This was personal now, a test of wills between beings who refused to bend. Thor landed a solid blow to Vader's chest plate, denting the sophisticated armor, and the Dark Lord's breathing apparatus stuttered dangerously. But Vader retaliated with a force push that sent Thor crashing through a databank, electricity arcing as systems overloaded around him. They came together again and again, each exchange devastating, each strike carrying the weight of power that could reshape worlds. Thor felt his strength beginning to wane, not the lightning, which flowed from him as naturally as breath, but his physical endurance. He had been fighting for nearly an hour straight, weathering attacks that would have killed ordinary beings instantly, and even Asgardian stamina had limits. But Vader was failing too. His armor was compromised in multiple places, his breathing apparatus cycling irregularly, and Thor could see the strain in every movement. The Dark Lord was sustained by technology as much as by the Force, and that technology was breaking down under sustained electromagnetic assault. "End this," Thor said through gritted teeth, holding Vader's lightsaber locked against Stormbreaker's haft. "Walk away, Vader. Let me leave. I have what I need. I will depart this galaxy and never return. There is no need for either of us to die here." Vader came at him with the full fury of the dark side, his lightsaber moving in patterns so fast it created afterimages, each strike carrying force-enhanced power that would have cleaved through anything less durable than URU metal. Thor met him blow for blow, Stormbreaker against lightsaber, lightning against force energy, two titans clashing in the heart of the Empire's knowledge repository. They fought through the archives, their battle destroying irreplaceable data, shattering crystalline storage matrices, setting fire to physical documents. Neither cared, this had transcended politics or tactics. This was personal now, a test of wills between beings who refused to bend. Thor landed a solid blow to Vader's chest plate, denting the sophisticated armor, and the Dark Lord's breathing apparatus stuttered dangerously. But Vader retaliated with a force push that sent Thor crashing through a databank, electricity arcing as systems overloaded around him. They came together again and again, each exchange devastating, each strike carrying the weight of power that could reshape worlds. Thor felt his strength beginning to wane, not the lightning, which flowed from him as naturally as breath, but his physical endurance. He had been fighting for nearly an hour straight, weathering attacks that would have killed ordinary beings instantly, and even Asgardian stamina had limits. But Vader was failing too. His armor was compromised in multiple places, his breathing apparatus cycling irregularly, and Thor could see the strain in every movement. The Dark Lord was sustained by technology as much as by the Force, and that technology was breaking down under sustained electromagnetic assault. "End this," Thor said through gritted teeth, holding Vader's lightsaber locked against Stormbreaker's haft. "Walk away, Vader. Let me leave. I have what I need. I will depart this galaxy and never return. There is no need for either of us to die here." "I cannot," Vader replied, and beneath the mechanical distortion Thor heard genuine regret. "The Emperor commands. I must obey." Even if it means my own destruction. Then you are already dead, Thor said sadly. Dead to everything you once were, bound to serve until service destroys you. I pity you, Darth Vader. You could have been magnificent. He released a final surge of lightning, not aimed at Vader but at the archives around them, overloading every system simultaneously. The chamber exploded in a cascade of electrical destruction as Thor used the chaos to disengage, propelling himself backward with storm winds, creating distance. Vader pursued, but his damaged armor couldn't maintain the pace. Thor reached the chamber exit and paused, looking back at the Dark Lord standing amid burning databanks and shattered dreams. Perhaps one day you will remember what it means to be free, Thor called across the distance. When that day comes, seek me out. I will gladly stand beside you against any tyrant, including the one you currently serve. Then he was gone, running through corridors that led toward the palace's exterior, following an escape route mapped during his study of the schematics. Behind him, alarms wailed and pursuit forces mobilized, but Thor had what he needed now: knowledge, possibility, hope. He crashed through a viewport on the palace's mid-level, plummeting toward the city below, and called forth the storm winds to guide his fall. Lightning arced between buildings as he descended, illuminating his path, and for the first time since arriving in this galaxy, Thor felt something approaching freedom. Somewhere above, on the Devastator's bridge, sensors detected the energy signature disappearing into Coruscant's urban maze. Reports flooded into the command center. The intruder had escaped, taking classified information, leaving a trail of destruction through the palace itself. And in his throne room, Emperor Palpatine sat in darkness, his yellow eyes gleaming with cold calculation, and began planning how to either recapture or eliminate the god who had defied him. The hunt had begun. Coruscant's underworld was a revelation, a multi-layered labyrinth of society that existed beneath the gleaming towers and political grandeur of the surface levels. Thor descended through atmospheric layers where sunlight never reached, where the wealthy citizens above never ventured, where the Empire's iron grip loosened just enough for other powers to flourish in the shadows. He found refuge in a district called Level 1313, a name that spoke to its depth beneath the planet's nominal surface. Here, the architecture was ancient, predating the Empire by centuries or millennia, buildings stacked upon buildings in geological layers of civilization. Neon signs flickered in dozens of languages, advertising services both legal and otherwise. The air tasted of recycled atmosphere, cooking fires, and industrial pollutants. And the people, humans, Twi'leks, Rhodians, species Thor had never encountered, moved through the crowded streets with the wariness of those who survived by trusting no one. Thor had exchanged his distinctive Asgardian armor for local clothing purchased from a vendor who asked no questions when offered credits, currency he had taken from the unconscious royal guards. He kept Stormbreaker concealed beneath a long coat, though its power hummed against his consciousness, ready to be called forth at a moment's notice. For 3 days, he had evaded Imperial search parties, moving through the Underworld's tangled passages, learning its rhythms, gathering information. The Empire's presence was lighter here. Stormtrooper patrols existed, but they moved in large groups for mutual protection, avoiding the narrow alleys where local gangs and criminals held sway. This was a place where Imperial authority ended and survival began. Thor sat in a cantina called the Molten Core, nursing a drink that tasted vaguely alcoholic and watching the entrance. He had come here following rumors of someone who might help him, a smuggler with connections to the Rebel Alliance, someone who trafficked in illegal technology and forbidden knowledge. The individual who entered matched the description Thor had been given, a Corellian human with roguish features, wearing a vest over a white shirt, blaster holstered at his hip, and an expression that suggested he trusted absolutely no one. He was accompanied by a massive Wookiee whose fur was marked with age and experience, and who carried a bowcaster that looked powerful enough to punch through durasteel. The Corellian scanned the cantina with practiced ease, his eyes pausing on Thor for a fraction of a second longer than the other patrons, then moved to the bar. Thor watched him order, exchange words with the bartender, slip the alien some credits. The bartender gestured subtly toward Thor's booth. After receiving his drinks, the Corellian and his companion approached. "You're the one asking about passage off-world," the Corellian said without preamble, sliding into the booth across from Thor. The Wookiee remained standing, his bowcaster held with casual readiness. "Name's Solo. Han Solo. This is Chewbacca. Word is you've got Imperial heat on you, bad heat, the kind that comes with orbital bombardment and shoot-on-sight orders. That kind of heat costs extra." Thor studied the smuggler, noting the intelligent eyes beneath the cocky exterior, the way his hand never strayed far from his blaster, the subtle positioning that kept his back to the wall and multiple exits in view. This was a man who had survived dangerous situations through a combination of skill, cunning, and pragmatic self-interest. "I need transport to the Outer Rim," Thor said quietly. "And access to individuals who understand exotic physics, dimensional barriers, hyperspace anomalies, theoretical research that the Empire might consider too dangerous or impractical." Solo's eyebrow raised. "That's a specific request. Most people just want passage to somewhere the Empire can't find them. You're looking for something else." "I am looking for a way home," Thor said simply. "I am not from this galaxy. I arrived here by accident, and I need knowledge to recreate the means of my travel. The Empire offered assistance in exchange for servitude. I declined. Declined Emperor Palpatine." Solo whistled low. "You don't do anything halfway, do you? Let me guess, you're the one who tore up the Imperial Palace 3 days ago. The anomaly every bounty hunter from here to Tatooine is looking for." Thor said nothing, but his silence was confirmation enough. Solo leaned back, exchanging a look with Chewbacca that involved several growled Shiriwook syllables and significant gestures. Finally, the smuggler nodded as if reaching a decision. "Normally, I'd walk away from a job this hot. But I've got associates who might be very interested in meeting someone who fought Darth Vader to a standstill and lived to tell about it. And who clearly has no love for the Empire." He paused. "You willing to meet with the rebellion?" Thor considered this carefully. The Rebel Alliance, the third scenario Admiral Versio had presented, the one Thor had refused to attack because they represented military resistance rather than terrorism. But he knew nothing about their true nature beyond Imperial propaganda and his own suspicions. They could be freedom fighters or simply different tyrants waiting for power. "I will meet with them," Thor said finally. "But I make no promises of alliance. I have my own objectives, my own code. If your rebellion proves worthy of respect, I will offer it. If they prove otherwise, I will walk away." "Fair enough," Solo said. "Can't ask for more than honesty. But here's the thing, getting you off Coruscant is going to be tricky. The Empire's got the orbital lanes locked down tight. Every ship leaving the planet is being scanned, inspected, crews interrogated. They're not taking chances that you might slip through. Then how do you propose we depart?" Thor asked. Solo grinned, and there was something reckless in the expression. "I've got a ship, fastest hunk of junk in the galaxy. The Millennium Falcon. She's made the Kessel run in less than 12 parsecs, and she's got enough modifications to slip past Imperial scanners if we're creative about it. But we're going to need a distraction. Something big enough to pull Imperial attention away from the spaceports long enough for us to make our escape." Thor understood immediately what Solo was suggesting: create chaos somewhere in the city, draw Imperial forces to respond, and use the resulting confusion to break through the blockade. It was risky, relied on timing and luck, and could result in civilian casualties if not executed carefully. But he had limited alternatives. Remaining on Coruscant meant eventual capture or death. The Empire had effectively infinite resources to throw at the problem, and even Thor couldn't fight an entire planet's military garrison indefinitely. "What kind of distraction?" Thor asked. "That," Solo said, "is where you come in. You're the guy who throws lightning around like party favors and went toe-to-toe with Vader. I'm thinking you create enough of a light show to make the Empire think you're attempting something serious, maybe threatening one of their major installations. They scramble everything they've got to respond. Meanwhile, we slip out during the chaos. Using me as bait, Thor summarized. Using you as a very dangerous, very effective bait, Solo corrected. Look, I'm not going to lie to you, this is dangerous. The Empire will throw everything at whatever position you take. You'll be facing multiple companies of stormtroopers, armored vehicles, possibly air support. But you've already proven you can handle that kind of heat. The question is whether you can hold out long enough for us to reach orbit and come back to extract you. Thor felt lightning crackle instinctively across his fingers beneath the table. It was a sound plan from a tactical perspective: use his power to create strategic diversion, allow the smuggler to escape, then fight his way to the extraction point. He had executed similar operations during his time with the Avengers, had served as the heavy hitter who drew enemy attention while others completed objectives. Where would this distraction occur? Thor asked. Solo pulled out a datapad and projected a holographic map of Coruscant's upper levels. Here, the Imperial military headquarters, Sector 7. It's a major command center, symbolic target, heavily defended. If the Empire thinks you're attacking it, they'll pull forces from across the planet to respond. That gives us our window. And the extraction point? Abandoned Warehouse District, Sector 12, Level 2000. Used to be a manufacturing hub before the Empire centralized production. Now it's mostly empty except for squatters and criminals. We'll have the Falcon waiting there. You fight your way through whatever the Empire throws at you, reach the warehouse, we pick you up and punch through the orbital blockade before they can coordinate a response. Chewbacca growled something lengthy and concerned. Solo nodded. Chewie's right, the blockade run is going to be hairy. But the Falcon's got surprises the Empire hasn't seen. We can do it. Thor studied the map, calculating angles and timing, weighing risks against potential gains. If this worked, he would be off Coruscant, beyond the Empire's immediate reach, with access to people who might possess the knowledge he needed. If it failed, he would be trapped, likely killed or captured, his quest to return home ended before it truly began. But staying on Coruscant guaranteed eventual capture. Palpatine would not stop hunting him, would dedicate whatever resources necessary to eliminate the threat Thor represented. I will do it, Thor decided. When do we begin? 2 hours, Solo said, standing and downing his drink in one swift motion. Gives us time to prep the Falcon and get into position. You hit the headquarters at exactly 1400 hours local time, that's when shift changes occur, maximum confusion for their response. Fight for 30 minutes minimum to ensure we've cleared orbital traffic control. Then get to the extraction point as fast as you can. He extended his hand, and Thor clasped it in the traditional grip of warriors acknowledging mutual respect. One more thing, Solo added. I don't know who or what you are, where you're really from, or why the Empire wants you dead so badly. But anyone who pisses off Palpatine that thoroughly is okay in my book. Try not to die out there. I will do my best, Thor replied with a slight smile. Though I should warn you, I am notoriously difficult to kill. Solo grinned back. Yeah, I got that impression. Alright, we'll see you in 30. May the Force be with you. And may the thunder guide your path, Thor responded, using an Asgardian blessing that seemed appropriate. The smuggler and his Wookiee companion departed, leaving Thor alone with his thoughts and the weight of the coming battle. He finished his drink and stood, moving toward the cantina's exit, already planning his approach to the Imperial headquarters. Thor studied the map, calculating angles and timing, weighing risks against potential gains. If this worked, he would be off Coruscant, beyond the Empire's immediate reach, with access to people who might possess the knowledge he needed. If it failed, he would be trapped, likely killed or captured, his quest to return home ended before it truly began. But staying on Coruscant guaranteed eventual capture. Palpatine would not stop hunting him, would dedicate whatever resources necessary to eliminate the threat Thor represented. I will do it, Thor decided. When do we begin? 2 hours, Solo said, standing and downing his drink in one swift motion. Gives us time to prep the Falcon and get into position. You hit the headquarters at exactly 1400 hours local time, that's when shift changes occur, maximum confusion for their response. Fight for 30 minutes minimum to ensure we've cleared orbital traffic control. Then get to the extraction point as fast as you can. He extended his hand, and Thor clasped it in the traditional grip of warriors acknowledging mutual respect. One more thing, Solo added. I don't know who or what you are, where you're really from, or why the Empire wants you dead so badly. But anyone who pisses off Palpatine that thoroughly is okay in my book. Try not to die out there. I will do my best, Thor replied with a slight smile. Though I should warn you, I am notoriously difficult to kill. Solo grinned back. Yeah, I got that impression. Alright, we'll see you in 30. May the Force be with you. And may the thunder guide your path, Thor responded, using an Asgardian blessing that seemed appropriate. The smuggler and his Wookiee companion departed, leaving Thor alone with his thoughts and the weight of the coming battle. He finished his drink and stood, moving toward the cantina's exit, already planning his approach to the Imperial headquarters. Outside, Coruscant's artificial day had reached its peak, harsh lighting illuminating the urban canyons between towers. Thor looked up at the distant sky, hidden behind layers of architecture, and thought of home. Of Asgard's golden halls. Of New Asgard's quiet coastline. Of the Avengers and the battles they had fought side by side. He would see them again. Would find his way back across impossible distances, through dimensional barriers that physics claimed couldn't be crossed. He had information now, the beginning of understanding. And he had allies, uncertain allies perhaps, smugglers and rebels who fought for their own reasons, but allies nonetheless. The God of Thunder gripped Stormbreaker beneath his coat and began walking toward Sector 7, toward the Imperial headquarters, toward the confrontation that would either secure his freedom or end his quest forever. 2 hours later, Thor stood before the massive fortress that served as the Empire's military command center for Coruscant's defensive sector. It was a monument to Imperial power, towering walls, automated turrets, shield generators, thousands of personnel moving through secure checkpoints. Taking such a position would require an army. Thor was an army of one. He shed his coat, revealing Stormbreaker and what remained of his Asgardian armor. Lightning began to build around him, crackling across his shoulders, dancing down his arms, arcing to the ground in brilliant tendrils. The sky above darkened as he called forth storm clouds, pulling moisture from Coruscant's atmosphere, creating the conditions for true thunder. Stormtroopers on the walls noticed him, their weapons tracking, officers shouting alerts. Sirens began to wail as the garrison recognized the threat standing at their gates. Thor raised Stormbreaker above his head, and lightning answered his call, a massive bolt that struck the headquarters shield generators with enough voltage to light a city block. The shields flickered, strained, then collapsed under the electromagnetic assault. I am Thor of Asgard, his voice boomed across the complex, amplified by thunder itself. I have come to deliver a message to your Emperor. Tell him that some beings cannot be bent, cannot be broken, cannot be made to serve tyranny no matter how sophisticated its justifications. Tell him that the God of Thunder stands against him, now and always. Then he charged, Stormbreaker blazing with divine fury, and the Battle of Sector 7 began. The Empire responded with everything it had, thousands of stormtroopers, armored walkers, aerial gunships, artillery that turned the plaza into a killing field. Thor met them all with lightning and storm, with the fury of Asgard unleashed upon beings who thought their technology made them invincible. He carved through their formations like a reaper through wheat, not killing when disabling would suffice, but showing no mercy to those who pressed the attack. Buildings shattered under the force of his blows. Vehicles exploded when lightning found fuel cells. The sky itself became his weapon as he called down bolt after bolt from the storm clouds overhead. And somewhere across the city, Han Solo and Chewbacca lifted the Millennium Falcon from its landing bay and punched toward orbit, slipping through gaps in Imperial coverage while every eye turned toward the god making war on the military headquarters. Thor fought for exactly 30 minutes, watching internal chronometers taught to him by Heimdall, and then he disengaged, using storm winds to propel himself above the battlefield and away toward Sector 12. Behind him, the Imperial headquarters smoldered, its defenses shattered, its pride wounded, but its personnel largely alive. He had made his statement. Now he needed to survive long enough to escape. The extraction point appeared ahead, an abandoned warehouse district, exactly as Solo had described. And there, settling on a cracked landing pad with repulsors glowing, was the most beautiful hunk of modified space junk Thor had ever seen. The Millennium Falcon's boarding ramp was already extended. Han Solo stood at the top, waving frantically. "Move it. We've got Star Destroyers redirecting to intercept." Thor landed running, sprinting up the ramp as Chewbacca began powering up the engines. The moment his feet cleared the threshold, the ramp retracted and the Falcon launched, accelerating toward orbit with thrust that would have liquefied unaugmented humans. Through the cockpit viewport, Thor watched Coruscant fall away beneath them, beautiful and terrible, the seat of an empire that claimed to bring order to chaos while crushing freedom beneath its heel. Star Destroyers appeared on sensors, vectoring to intercept, turbolaser batteries powering up. Solo's hands flew across the controls, pushing the Falcon through maneuvers that seemed to defy physics, threading between orbital platforms, using civilian traffic as cover, evading targeting solutions through piloting that bordered on the miraculous. "Hang on!" Solo shouted. Jumping to hyperspace in 3, 2, 1. The stars elongated into lines of light, reality twisted, and they were gone, escaped from the Empire's capital, carrying with them hope, information, and the beginning of a legend that would spread across the galaxy. The legend of Thor, the god of thunder, who had defied Emperor Palpatine and lived. The Millennium Falcon dropped out of hyperspace near Yavin 4, a jungle moon orbiting a massive gas giant on the galaxy's far edge. Here, hidden among ancient temples and dense canopy, the Rebel Alliance had established a base, temporary, modest compared to Imperial installations, but genuine in its purpose. Thor stood in the Falcon's cockpit as they descended, watching the green moon grow larger through the viewport, and felt something he hadn't experienced since arriving in this galaxy: hope. Han Solo had proven himself more than a mercenary smuggler during their escape. He had risked his ship, his freedom, possibly his life to extract Thor from Coruscant's jaws. And now he was delivering Thor to people who might possess the knowledge and resources to help him return home. It was more than Thor had any right to expect from someone he'd met hours before. The rebel base was modest, converted temple chambers housing communications equipment, hangar bays carved from ancient stone, personnel who looked more like volunteers than professional soldiers. But there was something in their eyes that reminded Thor of the Avengers in their earliest days, determination born from belief rather than obligation, courage that came from choosing to stand rather than being ordered to fight. A delegation waited as the Falcon touched down. Thor recognized their leader immediately, a woman with dark hair and regal bearing, wearing white robes that managed to be both practical and elegant. She carried herself with natural authority, the kind that came from earned respect rather than inherited position. "I am Leia Organa," she said as Thor descended the boarding ramp. "Princess of Alderaan and representative of the Rebel Alliance. Han tells me you fought your way out of the Imperial Palace and embarrassed Darth Vader in the process. That makes you either incredibly brave or incredibly lucky." "Perhaps both," Thor replied, inclining his head respectfully. "I am Thor of Asgard. I thank you for granting me refuge, Princess. I know harboring me places your alliance at risk." "We're already at risk," Leia said with a slight smile. "One more item on the Empire's list of grievances hardly matters. But Han also tells me you're looking for a way home, that you're not from this galaxy at all. Is that true?" Thor explained his situation, the Bifrost malfunction, his arrival in the Star Wars galaxy, his confrontation with Vader and Palpatine, and the information he had stolen from the Imperial archives. Leia listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, her sharp intelligence evident in how quickly she grasped concepts that should have seemed impossible. "We have scientists," she said finally. "Researchers who studied exotic phenomena during the Old Republic, before the Empire classified such knowledge as dangerous. If anyone can help you understand the data you recovered, they can. But Thor," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "If you do find a way home, what happens to the knowledge you've gained? What happens to the connections you've made here? The Empire will never stop hunting you, which means they'll never stop hunting anyone who helps you." It was the question Thor had been avoiding, the ethical complexity he hadn't wanted to face. If he left, would he be abandoning the rebellion to face Imperial retaliation for sheltering him? Would he be leaving behind allies who had risked everything to help a stranger? "I do not know," Thor admitted honestly. "I have responsibilities in my own reality, people who depend on me, threats I swore to face. But I also recognize that I have inadvertently become part of your conflict simply by refusing to serve Palpatine. Walking away from that, it feels like abandonment." "Then don't think of it as walking away," Leia said. "Think of it as returning home with knowledge of another galaxy, another reality. Maybe someday, if we survive this war, we'll find a way to reach you. Or maybe you'll find a way back to us. The universe is bigger than any of us imagined, your presence here proves that." Over the following weeks, Thor worked with the rebellion scientists, sharing the Imperial data and his own understanding of Asgardian dimensional travel. The Tesseract research provided crucial insights. The artifact the Empire had studied possessed similar properties to the Bifrost, suggested that stable dimensional passages could be created given sufficient energy and proper focusing mechanisms. But reconstructing such technology would take time. Months, perhaps years. And Thor could not remain idle while good people fought and died in the struggle against Imperial tyranny. So he fought alongside them. Not as the Empire's weapon, but as the rebellion's volunteer. He joined missions to rescue prisoners from Imperial detention centers. He disabled Star Destroyer's shield generators so rebel starfighters could strike vulnerable systems. He stood against Inquisitors who hunted Force-sensitive children, protecting innocents from the same corrupt power that had tried to bend him to its will. And slowly, the legend grew. Across the galaxy, people whispered stories of the Thunder God who fought beside the rebellion, who called lightning from clear skies, who had faced Darth Vader himself and lived. Some said he was a Jedi survivor using new Force techniques. Others claimed he was an ancient weapon awakened from millennia of sleep. A few, those who had seen him fight, insisted he was exactly what he claimed, a god from beyond the stars. The stories reached Coruscant, reached the Imperial Palace, reached Emperor Palpatine sitting on his throne of darkness. And the Emperor knew that Thor represented something far more dangerous than simple military power. He represented possibility, the idea that beings existed beyond the Empire's control, that power could come from sources the Sith did not command, that resistance was not futile. Palpatine increased the bounty, dispatched more Inquisitors, tasked Vader personally with hunting down and eliminating the Thunder God. But the galaxy was vast, the rebellion mobile, and Thor had learned to hide among the scattered resistance cells that dotted Imperial space. Months became a year. Thor's understanding of dimensional physics grew, aided by brilliant rebel scientists and the recovered Imperial data. He learned that the Bifrost was not unique, merely a sophisticated example of a principle that existed throughout reality. Every galaxy had weak points where dimensions pressed close together, where sufficient energy could tear through barriers and create passages between universes. The rebellion helped him locate such a weak point, a spatial anomaly near a dying star in the unknown regions. With their help, he built a device, crude compared to Asgard's technology, but functional, that could focus energy into the dimensional fabric and create a temporary bridge. On the day Thor prepared to leave, nearly everyone at the Yavin base gathered to see him off. He stood in the hangar bay, Stormbreaker in hand, wearing armor repaired by rebel technicians, facing people who had become friends, comrades, brothers and sisters in arms. Han Solo approached, extending his hand. "You know, For a guy who claims to be a god, you're not half bad. Try not to forget about us little people when you're back home saving your own universe. I could never forget, Thor said, gripping the smuggler's hand firmly. You saved my life, Han Solo. That creates a bond not easily broken. If I can ever return, I will. And if your rebellion needs help that only a god can provide, find a way to call, and I will answer. Leia embraced him, tears in her eyes despite her regal composure. May the Force be with you, Thor of Asgard. And may whatever powers guide your people watch over you. You gave us hope when we needed it most, hope that the Empire's power is not absolute, that beings exist who can stand against darkness and refuse to be corrupted. We'll remember that. Always. Thor looked around at the assembled rebels, pilots and soldiers, technicians and strategists, humans and aliens united by the simple belief that freedom mattered more than safety, that some principles were worth dying for. They reminded him of the Avengers, of the Warriors 3, of everyone he had ever fought beside against impossible odds. The Empire will fall, Thor said, his voice carrying to every person present. Perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but eventually. Because tyranny always falls, not to superior force, but to the unyielding spirit of those who refuse to surrender their dignity. You are that spirit made manifest. You are hope incarnate. And when the Empire finally crumbles, remember that a god from beyond the stars believed in your cause. He raised Stormbreaker high, and lightning answered his call, cascading down from the hangar bay's ceiling, surrounding him in a pillar of brilliant electrical fury. The device the rebels had built activated, tearing through dimensional fabric with energy borrowed from a dying star, opening a passage that shimmered with rainbow light remarkably similar to the Bifrost. Through that passage, Thor could see home, or something close to it, a tunnel through realities that would carry him back to his own universe, his own galaxy, his own Earth. He stepped forward, paused at the threshold, and looked back one final time. May the Force be with you all, he said. And may thunder always answer when you call for aid. Then Thor Odinson, God of Thunder, Prince of Asgard, Avenger of Earth, stepped through the dimensional rift and vanished in a cascade of lightning and rainbow light. The passage sealed behind him, reality healing itself, leaving only the lingering scent of ozone and the memory of the god who had walked among mortals and chosen to stand with the righteous rather than the powerful. In the Imperial palace on Coruscant, Darth Vader stood at a viewport overlooking the endless city, his breathing apparatus cycling with mechanical regularity. He had received the report, the anomaly had departed, escaped Imperial jurisdiction entirely, returned to wherever he had come from. The Emperor had ordered the investigation closed, the resources dedicated to hunting Thor reallocated to crushing the rebellion. But Vader remembered. Remembered the warrior who had fought with honor even when honor seemed disadvantageous. Remembered words spoken in anger and compassion, perhaps one day you will remember what it means to be free. Somewhere beneath the armor, beneath the dark side corruption, beneath decades of service to tyranny, a small part of what had once been Anakin Skywalker stirred. Not awakening, not yet, but acknowledging that perhaps, just perhaps, there were paths he had not considered, choices he had believed closed that might still be possible. The galaxy continued spinning. The rebellion continued fighting. The Empire continued consolidating power. And across dimensional barriers that physics claimed couldn't be crossed, Thor returned home, carrying with him the memory of a galaxy far, far away, and the knowledge that no matter how vast the universe, certain principles remained constant, courage in the face of tyranny, compassion in the midst of war, and the understanding that true power came not from domination, but from the choice to stand for something greater than oneself. Years later, when Luke Skywalker would redeem his father and the Empire would finally fall, some would remember the Thunder God's prophecy. And on clear nights when lightning flashed across liberated worlds, children would whisper that perhaps, somewhere beyond the stars, the God of Thunder still watched over them. The legend had become eternal.